About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our two closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and really beautiful. The beauty of it and creepiness of it is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, but never felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there's always people around, especially in the summer. The first day was awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remembered having a great time there. The campsites are fairly close together and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I thought we were all getting pretty pumped up about the site as there were no neighbours around the sides, just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This isn't common, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally. We had breakfast and then head to the lake for a couple hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground. We ended up getting back at around 2ish, and we noticed that the site next over to us had a silver rented car parked on it. We didn't think much of it, and went about a fire. At some point, we noticed the occupants of the site next to us. It's a pretty average looking white dude, maybe early 40s. He was so average looking that it's hard to even picture him. We all immediately caught on to the fact that he was constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath saying, "You notice that guy keeps looking here." I remembered feeling uncomfortable as we're all in our bathing suits from the lake. But I make a conscious effort just to ignore it. It's worth mentioning that we're a little buzzed/drunk, not out of control, just feeling good. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice the guy constantly staring at us. In hindsight, Dave or I should have called him out. The story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to the trip and really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off my relaxed vibes. The alcohol coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him led to us not confronting it. I just thought he was a lonely dude. Aside from the start, there were a couple of mildly weird incidents that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that at some point, he left his site to go and do whatever. When he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s, about our age, walked by it and snapped a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything. She smiled and awkwardly kept going. Dave and I both thought it's odd, but we're preoccupied with beer. Later in the evening, around 7ish, the camp host was doing her round checks on people. She kept checking us in and moved on to him. I remembered all of us eavesdropping intently to what they're saying. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like. He kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't know there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was. But he had 100 different questions about it. Where is it? When's it open? Is it private? Which are not weird, but in context, definitely odd. The sun started to go down. We're all drunk, so weren't too concerned with the creepy dude anymore. At one point, we went for a walk and I noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. Now, I would call out this kind of behaviour, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all continued to laugh and talk about how creepy he was. Now we have a good time and keep drinking. At one point, the guy started eating beans aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern, no fire. He looked at us while doing so, and Dave and I noticed this and kind of snicker at each other about how weird it is. Eventually, compose yourself. Eventually we decided to go to bed. I think the guy had left his site at this point. I remember joking, saying, "I better not wake up to that guy looking in our window." My wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck. I remembered feeling creeped out as I fell asleep, but shrugged it off. Around 2 a.m, Both my wife and I were jolted awake by what we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if each other heard that. We come to the conclusion that it was probably somebody trying to be loud, and decided to go back to sleep. As I was trying to sleep, I start feeling very unsettled. I decided to get out of the car and take a look around. I checked my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze and then heard it again. I eventually realised that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered, "What?" And I heard Dave say, "Can you hear that? Start your car." I instantly realised that something is wrong, so rather than ask questions, I climbed back into my car and started it right away. Dave and Sarah busted out of the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car. They tell me drive. They were too freaked out to even explain anything. Eventually I pulled over, figuring we're far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. Now finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what happened. As she put it, she was woken by a light coming from a creepy dude's campsite. Apparently, he had lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, naked, staring in our direction. It gets weirder. At some point, he turns off the lights and tries to signal across to us. I'm talking like Morse code or something. Across the ravine, an old RV begins using its headlights to signal back. Dave is awake now. I questioned them on this detail, and they're both very clear they were communicating. Keep in mind, it's absolutely pitch black out. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. This is what caused Sarah to scream, hence waking me up. At this point, I decided we need to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was about an hour and a half up an old camp service road that was already very remote. So leaving at night wasn't an option. We decided the best course of action was to alert the camp host. We drove around and eventually found the trailer she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was responsive. She mentioned that the guy was really weird when she even checked him in, and she called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently, there was a massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police can't even send anyone until sunrise. The camp host said there wasn't really anything she could do beyond that. It really sucked to hear that. Now, I don't know what we can do, not to mention there's still that guy in the RV. One more thing really weird happened. At around 4 AM, we're all sitting in my car when a man in a hood walked right up to the window, and the second I noticed him, I turned on my engine and headlights. I'm not kidding you, he bolted off into the trees. We all sat in my car until sunrise, once the light was out. We went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was there with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt gross and we wanted to get out of there, so quickly leave. After a couple of hours we left, I get a call from the police. They said they went out to the campsite and questioned the guy. He said he was simply showering. The cop told me there was nothing he could do. It was our words against his. He questioned the RV people. They said they didn't know anything, but he mentioned a quote, "A very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." The whole experience with the police is frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said there wasn't anything they could do unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate. So there's my story. I learnt a lesson about being polite when somebody's making you feel uncomfortable. Nowadays, I'm much more aggressive with crazy people. I also know it's not easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally naked near us. I don't know. I wish I had more courage, but honestly, it's really scary in the moment and you have no idea what their potential is. I'm okay admitting that. Clearly we were dealing with a very messed up person who had accomplices. I can only imagine their end goal. I hate to think of it. I just wish the police could have acted better. This happened in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, out hunting deer with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. Now, I do remember this day like it was yesterday. My dad and I had a few different stands over in an area of maybe about 3/4 square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was 5, up until I was about 12, which is the legal age to hunt with a rifle. This particular morning, we walked to my first stand. It's about 5 in the morning, so pretty dark out. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always eerie. Now, not long after they left, I see a flashlight off in the direction that they left. It's always eerie in these situations. It's roughly 200 yards away now, moving in my direction. I figure they forgot something from the truck, or I don't know, so I decide to radio to see what they're doing. We're sitting in the stand. Frank's about to head to another one. He says, obviously this flashlight is somebody else. Now, this isn't super uncommon, and isn't really a big deal. The woods get crowded sometimes, and there is a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other person knows I'm here. I ended up dozing off though, as it's pretty dark out. Now, when I wake up, the sun's up. It's around 8 AM, and I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's heard or seen anything moving. Nothing yet. There's a couple of gunshots off in the distance. I get up, go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving again. Then, not far away, maybe 30 yards out, I decide to return. When I come back to my sound, I sit down and take a real good look around. I have the feeling that I'm being watched, but nothing's going on. I finally look out to my left when I saw a big flashlight and something orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during the gun season. I radio to my dad and Frank to see if either one of them are here. My dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank, and decide to grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. This is not Frank, and this guy is looking at me through his scope. Rifle aimed directly at me, which is a massive no-no. You never point your rifle at anyone, under any circumstances. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens, which is why normal people like us use binoculars. At first I'm like, what an idiot. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't point the gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking that he might shoot me. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, and stay behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand is on this kind of little knot. It's on the side of a much larger hill. I radio to my dad and tell him what's up. He says sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I can't do that and keep looking. Every time I look, he's aiming at me. He's always in different spots, still moving to my direction. I go back to look again, and he would be 30 yards away from the last time. A good 10 minutes of this happen, and my dad radios to me, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he's obviously trying to keep me calm at the thought that something serious might happen. He's still there but keeps moving. I don't know his problem. My dad tells me just keep hidden, he'll figure it out, that he'll be coming up near him in a minute or 2. That's when I hear the shot. I lose my mind trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot this guy? What's going on? I sit there for maybe 3 minutes. Feels like hours, and I hear, "Alright, coming out and head towards my stand." I peek over and I see my dad waving from alongside the ridge that the guy's been on. It turns out, Frank had been really restless and took a stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that the stranger's on, not knowing he's there. He knocked his radio batteries loose and couldn't communicate with us. Turned out the shot was actually Frank shooting a deer. My dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off from towards us, then to the logging road out of sight. I was driving late at night on the I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula, MT. I'm originally from Seattle, and I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along either side. It's occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm on my way to my hotel in Missoula when I notice that I need some gas. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump. It had a convenience store attached to it, but it was closed. I get this really weird vibe from the station as soon as I pull up to the pump. I hadn't turned off my car yet. I just put it in park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut off my car when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark figure come from the side of the closed convenience store, literally running at my car. Some instinct actually kicks in, and I pull my car back into drive and get the hell out of there. I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing after my car for a few seconds, but by that time, I make that turn and get back onto the freeway. I literally can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed for the rest of my drive either. Now this happened in 2009, so while smartphones did exist, they weren't as prevalent or as good as they are today. Even with my flip phone that I have at the time, I can't even get signal on it. Secondly, the events at the gas station happened in a span of about 20 seconds. Yeah, really quick. I arrive, park, turn off the car, see the dark figure running towards my car, and I put my car back into drive, burn rubber to get out of there, and I see the dark figure chasing after my car, tearing up on the freeway. And finally, someone mentioned the story of the Wendigo, and I've heard about it, but I wasn't isolated up in the mountains, and this was less than 30 seconds away from the freeway, so I don't really think it was that. I think the dark figure was a desperate meth head looking to rob someone or hurt someone. After you've driven hundreds of miles, your brain doesn't really think straight, but I don't know what it could have been. All I know is that it terrified me, and I still think about it to this day. I was walking on a trail in the Crater Lake to get back to my car, and as I'm doing so, I hear somebody running behind me. I look, and it's an older man by himself. I quicken my pace as the sun is setting, and it would soon be dark. He stops running, and starts up again, getting closer, and I do the same, trying to keep distance. It felt creepy, and I was so thankful when I saw another woman with a big dog not too far in front of me. I met up with her, and eventually, so did the guy. We all walk together now, and this man is very strange and socially awkward. He had a camera. I'm certain the woman and I had the same creepy feeling from the exchanges we'd given each other. She said if he came here alone, and he replies that his family's already down the hill waiting for him. I immediately felt very ill when I heard this. And then, the really weird thing happened. He took at least 3 pictures of the woman and I. I could have asked him to delete them, but honestly, he probably never would have done so. And I just wanted to get back to my car, because he's making me feel very uncomfortable. We finally reached the bottom of the hill, and I noticed that there's no family in sight for him. He gets in his car alone and drives off. I felt very lucky there was another person there with me. I'm sure he was some kind of predator. So I went on a backcamping trip in some youth program in North Cascades near Seattle. One of us got hurt from falling on a rock on our way to the base camp, so I had to help carry him back to the trailhead while being accompanied by one of the leaders. On the way back, we came across another young hiker, a woman. We talked because we're kind of taking a rest. She said she was going to summit one of the peaks on the trail later. The problem is, that's about 8 hours away, and she only has a light backpack. Now the next day, back at base camp, helicopters swarmed, and men were dropping. It was like a movie. I was taken back. Little did I know, there was a huge search and rescue looking for the same woman I interacted with just hours before. For 3 days every night, all I would hear was the distant calls of men yelling out her name, echoing off the basin walls in an endless search. I remembered hearing it was supposed to be a suicide, that she was a seasoned hiker, yet she didn't pack properly enough. It didn't make sense. Perhaps she just wanted to go a little bit further than stay. I remembered after I flew home I would never stop thinking of her, and I never stopped. I still look her up, just to see that she is never found, that she's not with her family, and I hate that. You just have to be really careful when you're hiking. This was a few years ago in October, actually around the time the nationwide clown stuff was happening. It's hunting season, and I'm driving to a town north of where I live to meet my dad and ride with him in his truck. It's about 4 AM. Now when I pull off the freeway, I'm waiting for the light to turn green when I see a dude cross the road. Totally normal. I pull away and turn into the parking lot for the usual meeting spot, a park and ride situation. I turn off my car and wait for my dad. I took off towards the main road, and that's when I see a young guy walking towards my car. It's October and really cold, so I can't even see out the windows well. He just continues walking right up next to me until he's about 15 feet away from my car. He just stood there maybe for 10 minutes motionless, just staring at me. I wasn't even too spooked. Like I said, it was hunting season, so I can defend myself, but after 10 minutes, he turns around and walks away, literally never to be seen again. To this day, I still have no idea who he was or what he wanted from me. I've spent my entire life in the woods, taking regular hikes up to 20 miles on the weekends deep into canyons and headwaters of the pond, often in the dark fishing for steelhead. I also used to work building logging roads deep in the forest alone. I've seen lots of animals, cougars, bobcats, wolves, turkeys, bears. I've never been frightened, scared, or come across something I couldn't explain. My grandfather-in-law is an avid hunter. He spent his entire life doing it and told me a few stories. During one trip while hiking in a draw on Washington, somebody shot at him from the ridge. The shot put a hole in the stock of his rifle. He yelled and the guy took off, and he never caught up with him. I wonder if there's a guy out there somewhere wondering if he killed a guy. He also said to me one time, way out on a mouth-long hunt, he came across a wind chime about 100 feet off a tree. It was late fall, so all the leaves were gone, and he could clearly see it and hear it. He has no idea how it got up there. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms further north, we travelled straight west instead of from northwest at first, and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we're far enough north, we turn west onto I-90. At that point, it's been over an hour since we saw anyone, and we really needed a public restroom. We're on the state route, so there's no rest areas. Those of you who have travelled with a young child know that they have a bladder limit, and our daughter won't stop begging to pee. SD was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reach a desperately needed rest stop, as my at the time 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pull in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think too much of it at first, until I started to open my door. My head was turning to the right when the truck had parked a couple of spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy with scraggly brown hair and dark eyes. I could see he was wearing a dingy/dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband I didn't want to go to the rest stop alone because the guy's giving me really weird vibes. He thought I was being a little silly but agreed to come with us. Now by this point, the next stop is Wall, SD, about 100 miles away, according to the huge billboards that we had passed advertising, so he figured he'd better empty his bladder even though he didn't feel like he needed to. I grabbed our daughter and we headed back inside, followed by the guy who had finished rummaging around his truck but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and head back to the lobby. As I expected, now my husband's already waiting out there. Now, the old guy was also in the lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushes us back to our car. As we're buckling in, he locks the doors and told me that the guy hasn't even went to the restroom. Instead, he was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might need to just get out of here and it's probably a close call. However, the story didn't end there. Remember how I mentioned Wall and it's about 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turn-offs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the whole episode is actually behind us. Except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some snacks. When we get there, we see the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us, same clothes, everything. He starts staring at us and we pay for our snacks and immediately get out of there. I can't believe the fact that he followed us for over 100 miles. Thankfully, after speeding out of there, we never saw him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely. I grew up poor in the mountains of southwest Virginia. We didn't really have internet. It wasn't available. We lived in rural, isolated locations, so no kid would actually go out to play with us. As a teen, I would spend most of my time hunting or riding my bike a few miles to the river to go fishing. I was a stereotypical country boy. I was and am completely comfortable at home in the woods by myself, even at night. We had hounds and I took them out alone at night to go hunt raccoons. I went to our hunting grounds and turned them loose, same as I've done lots of times before. I sat down and waited for them. We didn't have the best dogs. They were young and not trained yet. They wouldn't normally find raccoons and would try and go for a deer or a rabbit. After a few minutes, they hadn't opened and that was very odd. I started to walk and call out for them, but I don't get a response. so this is odd. I kept walking and come out into the brush and into a cow field so I can walk easier and go call them in the next holler over. Now a holler is a small valley in between the ridge lines. As I come out into the cow field, I notice the entire ride line is glowing red. It was the first time that the farmer was clearing brush, and so he has a bonfire burning. I went to check it out and make sure it wasn't starting a forest fire. As I got closer to the top of the ridge, I noticed the glow was solid and not flickering like flames should. There was no smoke that I could smell. I noticed the sheer amount of light, and most of what I thought was colour is actually vibrant red. The only way I can describe it is a stoplight on a dark street that's casting a glow on everything, changing its colour to roughly that. I froze. This isn't coming off as something natural. Where I am is miles off the beaten path with definitely no electricity. It would have been possible for a lifted 4x4 truck or tractor to get there, but no way would it make this much light without a lot of vehicles lined up with their parking brakes on. I had a 20 gauge single shotgun loaded with me. It happened to have a few shells of a buckshot and some slugs in my backpack. I quickly loaded a slug and held a few shells in my hand, ready for follow-up shots, prepared to defend my life. I was terrified. I snuck home as quickly as possible without using my flashlight. I told my mum and stepdad what happened, but they brush it off, and I'm scolded for leaving the dogs in the wood. I guess they thought I was just lazy and didn't want to go after them. The next day, I went back and looked for any signs of what I might have seen. Now there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. No burnt areas, no tire tracks, nothing. After a few days, I woke up and went into the living room. My stepdad was waiting for me. He jumped up and said he'd seen that light also. He'd been hunting in another location in the opposite direction, still within walking distance. He was waiting for the dogs with his light off when 3 bright flashes illuminate around him and make things glow red. He said it was bright enough that he could have read a newspaper at night. I thought it was so crazy for him to experience it too. We never had another encounter with the red light. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying it was aliens, possibly military or something, but I literally have no idea what this thing was. I visited Arizona in March of 2018 during my school's spring break. I'd already done the get drunk on the beach thing, so I figured I'd do something different. My uncle, aunt and first cousin lived in Flagstaff and they let me stay there for free, so it was perfect. What happened isn't exactly terrifying, but more unnerving. The first thing I noticed about northern Arizona was that it had a very different vibe than my home state of Pennsylvania. I never fully felt at ease the whole time I was there. Right off the bat, my uncle told me a few stories about people dying in strange ways and going missing unexplainably. Now, around 2 days into the trip, my uncle and I spent a long day exploring several interesting sites. We went to Walnut Canyon, where there are some cliff dwellings, and then to an extinct volcano called Sunset Crater, where NASA actually rehearsed the moon landings. When we're hiking up an escarpment of several hundreds of feet in lightly wooded terrain, the whole time I'm looking down at my boots because it's kind of steep and I don't want to make a wrong step. At one point, I looked up and directly in front of me is a girl in her mid-20s and a man the same age ahead of her. It was strange because even though there were trees, it was pretty wide open to the summit, and we should have seen them at some point, so this doesn't make sense. We made it to the top where there was a wide open vista and we stopped to take pictures. The couple did too, and we struck up a conversation. It turned out they're from France and were on a PAC marriage, a type of civil marriage that's their new thing there. I was kind of geeked because I'd been to France and loved the people, so I tried some of my rusty French lingo. The girl giggled and answered back politely. I thought they seemed nice. My uncle started trash talking them to their face when he realizes that they weren't married in a church, which appalled and embarrassed me. They kind of backed off and continued taking pictures. At one moment, I looked back at the couple, and when I did, it seemed as though they froze in time. I don't know for how long. The couple was standing side by side. Now, it looked as though they were barely making contact with each other. I snapped out of it and looked away, and my uncle started making his way back towards the trail, so we hiked down and left without seeing them again. 2 days later, my uncle and I went and spent the day hiking along the rim of the Grand Canyon. At one point, a family came down the trail from ahead of us and stopped and talked to us for a minute or two. We parted ways. They went behind us. About 2 miles down the trail, the same exact couple came from just where they were before. The trail wasn't a loop. It was a straight shot along the rim, one way up and down. My uncle this time was kind of confused and confrontational, like, how was a French couple in the exact same kind of area even further up? I said if he thought it was weird, and he grunted and we continued in silence. Evening came, and we retraced our steps and almost made it back to the truck. We made one last stop at an observation deck to take in the sunset. We spent about 15 minutes there, and it was packed with people, but there was sort of a relevant hush in the air because of the beauty of the moment. I got separated from my uncle in the crowd, but it was quiet enough that I could hear my uncle loudly exclaiming and sort of jeering at someone. I followed his voice. I found it is the same French couple we'd met a couple of days earlier. I already learned that 5 million people visit the Grand Canyon, so I'm shocked now and don't say anything at all. I remember my uncle going off about their marriage again and said something like, "Go ahead and seal the deal, mate." He grabbed me and left. On the way back to the car, he said, "I have a feeling we're gonna see them again." I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. We must have been about 90 miles ahead when we saw them again. Now my cousin worked in the EMS, so I didn't really get to see him for the first few days. He took me on a backcountry trip through the Navajo reservation to obscure places that I'd never been before. He's pretty adventurous. It was myself, my cousin, and a friend he had met when he was working as a guide on rafting trips through the Grand Canyon. She gave me a really bad vibe the moment I met her. She was 31, while both my cousin and I are only 22. I don't know, she was very mummy-like. We went to a bunch of different Navajo sites, and the last stop on the first day was Monument Valley. We drive up the road and set up a camp there. My cousin mentioned skinwalkers, but didn't have any specific stories. He also said that he heard from a veteran emergency responder that they got a missing person report and followed footsteps into the desert with dogs on the scent trail, but the footsteps actually stopped in the middle of the desert without a trace or explanation, and the dogs went crazy when they reached a dead end. My cousin had the first 2-hand experiences when he first started EMS. He got called to a car accident in a valley leading to Sedona. The car was badly mangled. They couldn't even find a body. They end up searching the woods, and about 50 feet into the tree line, there's a man sitting against a tree, wide eyes, no visible injuries from the wreck. He said he never heard what the cause of death was. The last story was from a search for a missing person at the Grand Canyon. He was some sort of professor or geologist type researcher, and was midway down the canyon with another individual. They split up, and the professor guy said he'd meet his friend on the other side of a butte, which is a large rock overcut. The friend took a low path and the professor cut right across. They should have met up a couple of minutes later, but the professor vanishes without a trace. My cousin said they searched for him for weeks with helicopters but never found him. If anyone's heard this story, let me know. We walked for a long while, and there were more stories that I can't fully remember. We were camped along the base of a small rock outcrop. I'd been facing towards the rocks most of the night, but before we turned in, I looked out into the desert before any darkness fell. I saw that it was as flat and as far as the eye can see. You could see for miles without obstruction. I live near a city, and at home on overcast nights, the lights from the city bounced off the clouds, giving a soft white glow. That night in the desert, I saw the same glow as if from a city off towards the horizon, lighting up from one end to the other. I asked my cousin, is there a city? And he said it's probably Vegas, but we're facing north in Utah, so it definitely isn't Vegas. I scanned 360 degrees around and it's pitch black. I finally get into the tent to try and sleep. I've never been in the desert before, so I don't know the atmosphere and what it's supposed to be like. I've read a bunch of posts about an extreme hushed silence and stillness, but I've heard about rooms built in a vacuum, devoid of any sound, and apparently the silence is painful. That's the closest to that I've ever experienced at night. There was no wind or atmospheric pressure, and I could hear my own blood pulsating in my ears and my heartbeat. The silence was painful. When I finally managed to get some sleep, I have a nightmare about a corpse being buried next to me. The next day was fine for the most part, but as soon as the night fell, I developed an excruciating headache that radiated throughout my entire body and made me feel sick to the gut. I figure it's dehydration. Even though I'd been drinking water throughout the day, I gulped down 2 lots of water and took a handful of Tylenol, but to no effect. We dropped off my cousin's friend and stopped for some food. At the time I was still a member of the Catholic Church and went to a Catholic university. My family I was staying with and some of the others we met, they would tell me I'm very Catholic and it's weird I'm out in the middle of nowhere. It seemed weird. Now, for some strange reason, my cousin took me to the empty parking lot of a Catholic church so we could order some food. It was here that he told me he felt like it was humanity's destiny to kill and make war in an endless cycle, and that he wants to join the military for that purpose. On the other hand, I'm a humanity-loving, peacenik sort of dude, so this scares the life out of me. My headache got worse, and I think I was picking up on some serious negative vibes. I couldn't eat any food and save it for the next day. Nothing else strange happened, but it was more the accumulation of things that really freaked me out on this trip. Now, as some updates, it seemed like the 2 days we spent out on the Navajo reservation, my cousin and his best friend were trying to squeeze out every last piece of sightseeing they could on the trip, and not for my sake either, but their own curiosity. It was exhausting, and I wonder if they could tell how tired I was. I have no idea what the place is called, but it's near Tuba City, Arizona apparently. It's a pretty interesting place, and it's in the absolute godforsaken middle of nowhere. Growing up, I always went to my grandma's house. My childhood had a parent with substance issues, and going to my grandma's house was the best. I had friends there, and she lived in a really nice suburb with tons of other kids my age. I made really good friends with a neighbour who had woods in his backyard. Let's call him Mike for the sake of the story. We'd often take little lunches packed by my grandma and go out into the woods and eat them, admiring the creeks and birds, collect pebbles and stuff. You know, kid stuff. This was harmless, and you could usually always see the backs of the houses when you went into the woods. I remembered one day, we made a pack. Mine was in a grocery bag and planned to venture out further than before. You know, you have limitless energy when you're young, and low pain hasn't set in yet from sitting at a desk for ages. I mean, you could literally walk for hours, and probably miles, and not even notice it. So we walk even further than ever. Now we slide down a hill. I remembered being really scared of this, and hilariously, I'm still majorly scared of falling when hiking. But anyway, I got a little scuffed up, but nothing major. Mike was slightly older than me, so I wanted to seem tough and just walk it off. We go deep into the woods, and I remembered being just slightly creeped out, but not enough to protest. I want to explore, too. This hasn't changed. This is in Western PA, I should add. We weren't in the rural areas of my state, but some of the suburbs do intersect with trails and nature preserves which can go on for acres and acres. We came upon a tent in the middle of frickin' nowhere, and I remembered being terrified. My grandma gave me a lot of freedom because I was responsible. This was in the 90s. Aside from needing to be home before the streetlights every night, stranger danger was something she drilled into my head. This set off the internal stranger danger alarm loudly, but I was too afraid to leave Mike's side. So we approached the tent, even though everything inside of me is telling me to get out of there. Mike goes up to it, and tentatively I follow him. At first, I thought somebody was camping, but it still looks more permanent than that. Anyway, there's a fire outside and smoke burning, but it's been doused. There were bones everywhere, skulls mostly, tiny ones, which, to my unattained eye, look like animal bones. There are also little pelts of animals covered everywhere in what appears to be paint and symbols. My adrenaline kicks in and I ran, Mike also. We ran so far and so fast that we fell down the side of the hill and ended up emerging from the woods on the other side of a shooting range. The men firing were screaming at us to leave. I was so scared of the tent that I didn't process the real danger which was at the shooting range. We definitely could have died very tragically because of that. So looking back on this memory, I was wondering, what the hell is this guy doing? There were literally bones everywhere and symbols. Now I dog sit for a family friend. They prefer to have somebody stay at the house with the dogs. I grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere and love the countryside. So for me, this is like a staycation, because I live in the city now and never have time to myself. Anyway, their house is out in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I really mean literally it takes 2 hours to get from work to this place. There is one neighbour within 5 miles and he lives directly across the street. I'm used to this where I'm from. It's supposed to give you the space you need but also help keep you safer, knowing that you actually have somebody nearby. However, this guy has done nothing but make me feel unsafe as hell. So anyway, eventually I make it to Terry and Johnny's house, and they're telling me the drill, when to feed the dogs, which are 2 super cute and spoiled Australian cattle dogs, watering the plants, etc. Then, as they're loading up their stuff to take it to the car, Terry says, "Oh, don't forget to tell her about Steve." Johnny says, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about the neighbour across the street. He's harmless. He drinks a lot, but he's harmless. Hell, the guy lost his license so many times, all he can do is go up and down on a moped." However, just in case, This is where we keep the gun. Steve has 3 "Don't Tread on Me" Confederate flags, 2 plain Confederate flags which are all hanging from his porch. Of course he's weird. He then takes me to his gun and explains that it's loaded if I want to use it, so I don't even need to cock it, just pull the trigger extra hard. At this point I'm like, whatever. You keep a gun in your house when it takes at least 45 minutes for the police to show up, so I get it. Still, I've got no worries. I'm used to drunken weirdos. I know how to handle them. I love this life in the middle of nowhere, and I've got 2 protective dogs that will attack on command, so I feel pretty safe. Terry and Johnny leave around 3 PM. I took the dogs for a walk and play some frisbee and begin to unload my stuff while they're still worn out from running. As I come back out for my second load of stuff, I hear the neighbour, Steve, slam his door, seemingly having a phone conversation. I hear him go, "Where the hell did you go?" The dogs are hearing him now and growling. I tell them to stay calm. I then hear him say, "I don't care about my kids, screw you." And then he throws something on the unpaved road behind me. Turns out it's his cell phone. As I'm grabbing my stuff, the dogs start going crazy and run a few feet behind me, barking viciously. I drop my stuff and turn around to see the neighbour at the end of the driveway, 75 or 50 feet away, just staring at me. I tell the dogs to calm down and to get back on my side, and they do. I then give Steve a friendly wave, thinking this is weird. He then takes a step forward and says, "You alright?" in a manipulative voice. Steve is wearing dirty jeans, work boots, dirty red hoodie, and a red hat with Confederate flags on it. He also got brown dirty hair down to his shoulders, and a beard that's probably 5 inches long. "Yeah, I'm okay," and I say my name. I'm just here sitting Johnny and Terry's dogs for the week. I look down at the dogs to see their reaction. They look as though they're about to attack him in a way I've never seen before. "How are you?" I ask him. "I'm Steve. Thanks for being a good neighbour and checking me." "I'm good. You okay?" And silence again. Now this silence lasts for probably a whole minute, and I figure, he's wasted. I need to get inside. So I turn around and finish grabbing my stuff. As I do so, I hear him take one more step on the gravel driveway and the dogs bark again. And Steve says, "I know them. They're not gonna hurt me. They're good dogs for sure. They won't hurt me." I begin feeling very uneasy, so I close my trunk and turn around to see if he's going to say anything else. I was about to tell him that I was going inside, and then, instead, awkwardly he says, "Yeah, yeah, what?" and yelled. I'm shocked and he says, "Yeah, I'm going inside now. Have a good night." I turn around and the dogs follow me. Steve instead continues to stand where I left him for literally 15 minutes later. Now this house doesn't have a front door. There's a side door at the back. The back door is the main door because of the front of the house has these big green privacy trees, so I can't even see him through the front window. You can't see either doors from the street. You have to come onto the property to see them. It's about 6 o'clock, and where I'm at, the sun starts going down around then, but doesn't usually get dark until 9:15 during the summer. Anyway, the dogs and I are on the couch, and I have my headphones on and I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 online. All of a sudden, the dogs flip out, running towards the back door, barking and growling. I'm like, what the hell? They don't usually do that unless somebody pulls in their car and they don't know who it is. I'm not having anyone over, so I grab my knife, which is close by, and start walking towards the back door. The dogs are still going crazy and I have no idea what they're looking at. I don't see anything, but then I look closer. I see mop tail lights in the driveway seemingly hiding behind my car. I then try and focus in and see that Steve is turned around staring at the back of the house from his moped, ducking behind my car. I get the dogs and try and be quiet. I need to see what he's doing. The dogs are still growling, but at least I've not given away my location right now. I watch him for 5 minutes. No movement, just a general creepy stare in my direction. I don't think he can see me, I'm not sure. He then shuts off his moped and proceeds to crouch next to my car, where I can see him now peeking into my car windows. I don't see him trying to get in, which is weird. He's not crouching now. Obviously he feels like nobody's watching and doesn't care. He stops looking into my car and turns to the house. Creepy as hell. At this point I text Terry and tell her that Steve is doing some weird stuff and I'm getting worried. I get a text back saying call the cops if you feel unsafe. They know him. They can come talk to him. Reminding me to tell you about the time he was standing out by the tree at 6 AM when I was leaving for work, and he was still there when we came back. We think he had a psychotic breakout. How comforting is that? So, I talk myself down some. This guy is wasted. However, if he starts getting close to the door, I'm calling the cops. Dumb idea, looking back, because the cops can take such a long time to get here. I'm watching him as he makes his second round looking at my car. He then gets on his moped and drives off, and he passes the window that faces the driveway. He sped up, trying to make it so I wouldn't see him if I were watching TV. Now it's like 8 PM. The dogs are going crazy again. I look out and now the moped is parked in plain view and he's standing on the walkway just 30 feet from the house, staring and talking to himself. I previously turned off all the lights so that he can't really see in. I see him take a single step towards the door, now 30 feet away. I grab the gun. I've calmed the dogs down and they're in full protective mode. One dog to my left and one to the right. It's around 8:15 PM now and I call the cops. I explain my situation and the owners think that he had a psychotic breakdown. As I'm halfway through explaining this, I'm really scared for my safety and the operator says, "Ma'am." She then says, "I'm sorry, but you're not located in our county. I have to transfer you to this one." Are you serious? The owner said that the cops in South know him very well and how to handle him. Isn't that the guy? Yes ma'am, that is us, but you are located in a different county. This is not our jurisdiction. The guy who's bothering me lives in your county, that's why I'm calling you. And the operator transfers me to another one. When she answers the phone with the average 911, what's your emergency? I'm silent. I'm looking out the kitchen window. Steve's about 4 or 5 feet closer from before. I explain what's happening and that I was transferred because apparently I'm not in their jurisdiction. She tells me to remain calm and turn on all the lights. I said no, the guy's waiting for me to do something like that. The doors are locked. I do have a firearm. If he enters, I will shoot. She then tells me that it's safest with the lights on. I turn on the lights. He notices. He then turns around to get on his moped and goes back home. I tell her what's happened. She said, "Do I want an officer?" I say, "Hell yeah." Apparently the cops in South in this state know him, but she transferred me to you. This is the 3rd time he's come onto this property and he's getting closer to the door and I'm not safe. Calm down, ma'am. We will still send somebody, however, based on where you're located, it's gonna take a while. I say that's fine. I say if she'll stay on the line. She says that it's not really possible because she has to take other calls, but to call back if anything else happens without hesitation. Now it's about 9 PM and the sun is getting ready to set completely. Again, the dogs are going crazy. Now I'm getting real annoyed and walking around the house with a loaded gun, so if Steve sees me, he knows I have a gun. I look out the window and see his moped, but I don't see him. Where the hell is he? From the window in the kitchen, I can't see the back door. I go upstairs. One of the dogs follows and peek through the window in the bathroom. Steve is on the back porch, lighting matches, throwing them down onto the wooden porch. He doesn't seem harmless anymore. He's talking to himself and twisting his head back and forth like he's getting warmed up for a fight, or having a conversation with multiple people. I start filming from upstairs. So now, I try and hide my phone, just in case he goes up for it. The sun is down and it's getting dark. He steps onto the door and starts knocking. He starts pounding on the door. I'm pretty good at staying calm in any situation, but my heart's beating. He then stops pounding the door, quickly turns away and runs to his moped and takes off even faster than I thought he could go. Not even a minute later, I see a cop pulling into the driveway. I mentioned to the dispatcher operator that I have 2 dogs that will bark at the officer but will not attack. They are trained to be like this. I say I'm going to leave the firearm inside when I go to meet the officer. I meet the officer and the dogs don't growl, simply gave a bark, letting me know that someone's there. I went outside to meet him and told him that the guy just took off on a moped, and he says, "Oh yeah, I think I passed him." I explained that he is absolutely drunk or crazy and in his own world, and that normal people don't act this way. The cop basically shrugs off everything and says, "Well, are you gonna stay there the night?" I said no, I will leave the dogs overnight and come back in the morning. I ask him to stay while I pack up everything. I go inside, give the dogs lots of love and treats, and create what they need for the night. I take off and return the next day with my dad. My dad begins walking the perimeter to try and show him that the man is also staying here. Now, I'm a 24-year-old female. If you're wondering, then Steve, wearing the same dirty hat and outfit while holding a 24 case of Budweisers, is standing at the end of the driveway again. I'm watching him from the front window. I see my dad at the other end, and he sees him. Steve immediately turns around and goes back into the house. Now, I later learned that Steve has been to jail multiple times due to domestic abuse, and his kids can't even see him. He's very violent. No one knows how he gets money to get things. Terry and Johnny have never seen him leave for work. They've only seen him on his moped or 4-wheeler that he recently bought. I don't know who he thought I was, but every time he looked in my direction, I saw pure hatred in my eyes and evil intent. I'm really glad my dad come to stay with me, because God knows what would have happened if he didn't. I've been staffed at a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers will regularly sneak out during night to drive into town to hang out and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed towards the town. After a couple of hours of jokes, buy a job blast from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads, joking around listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 AM and we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We noticed an old rusted out boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light just shining through, flickering from a fuse box right outside. The mood in the car changed in an instant. For a moment, we're all sat in silence, watching the flickering light. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something doesn't feel right. Eventually, To ease the tension that we're all feeling, we start to make a joke, jeering at one of our friends to go and turn the light off or open the door. However, suddenly, the door opens. The mood immediately changes. Nobody said anything. For the next few moments, they're a blur, but I can assure you that it was the fastest and early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever went off a road. All 5 of us are completely silent for the drive back. Something about the aura of that place felt off. To this day, I imagine sitting in the front seat of the car, and I start getting an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Who was behind that door? Why were they there at almost 4 in the morning? Why couldn't I see anybody else around, and why did it feel so off? Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old. At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with 2 friendly big dogs, one mastiff and another German shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog. It wasn't hunting season, and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch, and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face, and at this point, I know I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking. As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since, and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun, and I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in SE, Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, there was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now, this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall and darkness set upon the land very early. I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright, nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realise it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stare for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house and, in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard. As he often does, I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them, and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs at the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, he didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever, or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I'll never forget the feeling deep in my chest, both that night and the following morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent to me. It was late December in a small Texan town. We just received 5 inches of snow in the day. I can't remember what time it was. It's dark out and I'm playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 rooms, a mudroom with a door leading to our front and my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with an all old wood hardware and a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the most front-faced, with my parents being to the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt weird. It felt like somebody's watching me. I was facing the door at this point and look up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I started looking for some reason and start running. After a while, I'm sure nobody's there, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I get the feeling again. This time, I didn't look up at the door, but instead, I looked towards the window. I was just hoping that it's all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door. The doorknob's being touched. I was still, facing the door, completely frozen at the sound of the metallic doorknob. I don't know why or how, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I want to move, but I'm frozen. It was like somebody glued over every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents weren't immediately there, so I'm all on my own now. And suddenly, the door knob is being yanked with force. The door was one that had been locked with a skeleton key, so the doorknob could move freely. There's 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the doorknob was free to open. As soon as I heard the doorknob turn all the way, I sprung up the wall about 5 feet. The door fell silent. I'm glued to the wall, unable to move. The doorknob continues to slowly move. Whoever did so started trying to budge on the door, trying to pry it open, pounding on the door with their foot, kicking it. I froze until I started screaming for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked me what's wrong, and I said somebody's tried to break in. They ran inside and checked, not bothering to check outside, which I pleaded with them to do. They said it's my imagination running wild or an animal. They took one final look and said go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember going to sleep. All I remember is staring at the doorknob from my bed, never taking my eyes off of it. Suddenly, I woke up to my parents, who were obviously distressed and scared. My mum grabbed me by the shoulders, getting in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought somebody tried to break in. When I say, they listen. I was worried about how serious they were suddenly. When I thought they said it was my imagination, they took me to the front door, then to the backyard door, and pointed to the door near the driveway. You can clearly see boot prints in the snow walking along the street. Through our yard and straight to the window, then my mudroom door. This is where I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever come of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house again. I can never forget what it felt like as a child going through this and to have my parents not believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and thank God for the deadbolts. I'm a 17-year-old guy, currently living in Phoenix, Arizona. Shout out Arizona. This incident took place around 6 months ago on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, which are about an hour drive east of Phoenix. I won't specify exactly what this trail is. Anyway, the particular trail I was taking was an 8-mile loop through a canyon. It's pretty simple in and out on an overnight trip. I planned on going with my friend, but they cancelled on me in the last minute. So, with a bag packed and a car ready to go, I decide I'm going to go on my own, not leaving the house on time, and some trouble navigating through the forest roads. I didn't arrive on the trailhead until around 5:45, which for those of you who don't backpack, this is a very big no-no. I had about a 4-mile hike until I arrived at my planned parking spot, and it was getting dark fast. I figured if I moved very quick, I can get at least 3 miles in before I have to find a spot. This strategy left me hiking a very dark trail on my own, with about 15 miles of dirt road between me and anyone else. Hiking in the dark by itself is scary, especially since I'm on my own. Now, eventually it got so dark that I can only use my headlamp to see where I'm going. Now, with only using the headlamp as my light source and moving fast, I end up not where I want to be. This area isn't great, but I find a spot where there's some burnt pieces of wood and the remains of a circle fire, so it can't be too bad. My first priority was to get a fire going. I scanned the area around me and was able to find some dry wood, and I got a fire going. I got my tarp set up and crack open a can of chili mac. I brought it with here, and I really look forward to eating. I was feeling good. My camp was set up, my food was on fire. The feeling of uneasiness from the hike had almost gone away, but it was still there. Now, to fully understand what happened, I have to explain to you how my camp was set up. The site I had picked was a small clearing surrounded by large pine trees, with the trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're in the woods and have a fire going, and the fire casts a circle of light around it, and everything on the edge of that circle and past it are pitch black. Now I'm sitting on my ground near the fire eating my dinner, when a small rock, about the size of a marble, is actually thrown at my camp. I look at the tiny rock in shock, as I was positive that I was the only person on this trail at night. I immediately turn my light on, and towards the area that I'd seen the rock come from, but due on the destiny of the pines and brush, I can only see about 10 feet. I spent about the next 15 minutes in disbelief as I scanned the tree line that surrounded my area, searching for whatever had thrown it, not daring to stray too far from the fire I set. It was giving me a false sense of security, to be honest. After sitting back down and spending the rest of my time on high alert, I was able to convince myself that I had somehow kicked the rock or it had fallen from a tree. I went to sleep that night, not expecting the pure terror that was about to unfold. I woke to the sound of rustling leaves, really inaudible if you weren't listening for it at the time. I'm still in a sleepy daze. I listen to the rustling of leaves, but it gets harder to hear as I assume they were moving away from me. I went to grab my handheld flashlight that I had next to me when I'd fallen asleep, but the more I looked, the more scared I get as I realise that it's not even there now. I don't get how. I stand up in my sleeping bag, now ducking out of my tarp. Now, I can't really see far into the woods, but I was able to see a light off in them. It couldn't have been more than 15 feet away, but it's my flashlight laying on the ground in a pile of leaves. This is one of the few moments in my life that I've almost had a heart attack. The flashlight that I'd left sitting right next to me when I'd fallen asleep a few hours ago was now 15 feet away from me, past the tree line in the woods. I hurriedly slipped my boots on, clutching my knife in my other hand and keeping my head on a swivel. I weigh my options: stay here, wait it out, or attempt a 3-mile hike back to the car in darkness. I figured that whether or not I'm going to get out of here, I'll definitely have a better advantage if I was out on the trail with a light. So I decide that I have to stay at my camp and remain there for the night. Eventually, it came back. I could hear it walking through the woods. It was so far off that I couldn't hear it at first. It sounded like somebody walking by, strolling around without a care in the world. Sometimes it will walk far, then near, and a few hours later do the same thing. Still faint as ever. This goes on for 3 or 4 hours until I listen to the steps getting closer until they're about 7 feet from me. At this point, the fire's got really small as I've run out of wood for it, and the footsteps stopped and everything went totally silent. I sat there still for 2 hours, clutching my knife in my hand. I pray that whatever this is can just leave me. I stay like that until the sun came through, and I can see that I'm alone in my campsite. I packed up all my things and speed walked the 3 miles back down the trail I've taken. I arrived at an empty dirt road where my car was parked and nearly sprinted to it as I unlocked my Supra. I jumped in it and drove until I put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I stopped at a gas station in Apocaly Junction to buy a Red Bull, but mostly just to see or talk to someone. As I exit the store, I was able to read what was written in the dust on the back of my window. Sleep well. The hell? A lot of weird things happened to me on my various adventures through the Arizona, but this was the weirdest by far. I thought I had to share it. There's a seriously deranged person living in the Superstition Mountains. Do yourself a favour and stay as far away from them as you can. This is a story that's been really bothering me lately for absolutely no reason whatsoever. A few months back, I just had this dream that brought back this memory I tried to suppress growing up, but as of recently, it's been weighing on my mind. Growing up in 2005 on the edge of the suburbs, there was a large grove of trees and hills by some railway tracks that led to a big forest about half a mile from my home. When I was 9 years old, me and my neighbourhood friends would ride our bikes to the railroad tracks, we'd walk to the forest and go and explore the random pieces of furniture and junk in this forest. We'd play card games, do homework, and hang out with friends for about 2 hours. We never stayed too long. There was this small abandoned house, and in this forest, we always stayed away from it. As one of my friends, Michael, said, there's a homeless man that lived there, and if you saw him, run. So right off the bat, after hearing this, going near the house in the woods was as scary as could be. One chilly November afternoon after school, I came home and dropped off my backpack at the back of my home and immediately go there. My bike is broken at the time, so I walk. Michael told me at school that apparently, this area of the forest is a really good place to play Pokemon with him. This is something we'd frequently do growing up, just to pass time until our parents got home at 4. Nothing unusual. As I crossed the railroad tracks into the forest, I instantly felt a weird sensation. That feeling when somebody's watching you. I looked all around and don't see anyone, so I thought I was getting spooked as the rather overcast day was very eerie. Trekking through the autumn leaves scattered across this large wooden area, I come across a big open area where I'm supposed to meet Michael. Near to this area that we normally meet, I find his notebook open. On the page was written, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here. I'll be back soon. Michael." And I wait. Being alone, especially feeling like somebody was watching me, made this particular moment very uncomfortable. However, I convinced myself I was just being a wuss and decided to wait for Michael. I sat down and began playing on my Game Boy. It wasn't too long until that sensation of being watched grew into utter paranoia. I kept frantically looking for my Game Boy and checking my watch. I've been there for 30 minutes and it's starting to get dark. Then I heard some leaves crunch. I looked in the direction of the sound and briefly saw a dark hooded figure peeking from behind a few trees, then hiding back behind them. My skin crawled, and I immediately jump up from where I'm sitting, frozen in my tracks. I scream hello. I'm quickly reminded that I'm not alone, as I see this very tall, dirty looking hooded man peek from around the trees. He called back, "Hey buddy." I pick up Michael's notebook and I ran for my life. I ran so fast I barely had time to look behind me. However, I heard leaves crunching not too far from behind me. It's the man running for me. He was screaming for me to come back, and I just wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry. I began crying as I was running, thinking this was exactly how those kids disappear. I ran and ran and ran until I literally tripped over the railway tracks and cut my knees. Michael was just getting to the tracks. He saw me, crying, and I screamed at him to run. Without question, we ran all the way home. The hooded man was nowhere to be seen. I last saw him staring from the woods. Defeated that he couldn't catch me or something, I don't know. I told Michael everything that happened and we never went back to the woods again. Years later in 2016, they bulldozed the woods and built a neighbourhood there. We later found out from the fellow neighbourhood friends who lived in the area the same thing would happen to them. To this day, it's probably the scariest thing that happened to me. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time living with my grandparents. I liked hanging out there because they were around all day so I didn't feel as lonely, but of course I would get bored. They were lucky enough to own a cabin in a forest. I would often stay there. I'd bring food and just have a good time generally, or read, but of course it could be boring, and that would always lead me to explore the forest a little bit. I would never go too far out, just far enough that I could find some tranquility and enjoy myself, something that I probably didn't do often enough. Now sometimes when I'd go out on these trips, I would have the overwhelming urge to get out of the forest, or the sense that I was being followed. Normally, I thought, oh, there's probably just some animals around and I'm not really used to being out in the woods, but it was something that would continue for a long time. So much so that I actually become used to it, and I trained myself just to switch off from it, which probably wasn't a good thing, because even today, I have the problem where if I feel like I'm being watched, I don't even bat an eye at it. Now on one particular day when this happened, I was on one of my walks, and I didn't really think much of it like normal. However, there was a pungent smell that was truly overwhelming my senses. It really smelled like a dead body. I thought maybe an animal had died, but I couldn't see any. I can't ignore this, and now the paranoia sets in, as I realise that something might be watching me. I'm worried that maybe it's a dead body or something. I start returning back to the cabin. As I do, I can hear something falling through the trees. I stop dead in my track. I can see a large rock has been thrown just behind me. Now I'm certain it had been thrown there, because I never saw it before and I literally just walked there. Then I think to myself, if that rock hit me, it would have knocked me out or gave me brain damage. Just as I'm thinking that, I can see a large dark figure in the trees. The craziest part is I lock eyes with something with orange glowing eyes. Now I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I have never seen anything like this in my life. The smell, the rock being thrown, it all makes sense. I turn and start sprinting. I'm so scared that I start to tear up while I'm running. I can hear that thing closing on me. I start screaming and praying. I make a sudden turn and now I'm only about 50 meters away from the cabin. I glance behind me and I can see the figure again, this time walking. I don't care, I keep going until I'm in the cabin and I slam the door behind me. Through teary eyes I look out the window and I can see whatever this thing is staring back at me. It stopped as though it knows that it can't go any further. It simply turns around again and returns to the forest. I told my parents about it and my grandparents, but they don't believe me, but I know what happened that day, and I've never seen anything like it. I know that the area is where the Navajo are supposed to reside, but I don't think it was a skinwalker. It's truly the most scary thing that I've ever experienced in my life. This story takes place during the summer when I was 15. I was living with my dad and stepmother at the time. I remembered my mum throwing a royal fit about me buying new school clothes because I had let a few pairs of pants get holes in them and still wore them. It was my first year going into high school, and I wasn't going to let her spoil that for me, so I went to stay with my grandparents for the summer to earn money. They lived in a remote, small area that was once home to many native tribes, most prominently the Quinalu tribe. It's very secluded despite being only a mile or so from the highway. It's all lush, gorgeous forest. My grandpa had built his own 3-story house and a shop where he cut and assembled cedar into roofing products. That's where I came in, hauling heavy chunks of cedar to his van, stacking, nailing, chinking up pieces into smaller ones to be sold. I made good money while I was there, and could buy a new wardrobe. As summer was coming to an end, it was too hot to work, and I decided to walk one day. Now let me say that I spent my childhood roaming around these woods. Armed with my grandpa's 2 dogs, we ran and played and napped all day, and I'd never seen anything out of the ordinary or got weird vibes. I waited until it was a bit cooler in the evening and started out, walking a little path that would take me to an old unused logging road. I had tread this path so many times that I wasn't even paying attention until I felt like I was being watched. I would like to note here that I was young at the time and had yet to touch alcohol or drugs, and I had no history of hallucinations or mental illness, so what I saw really haunts me. There he was, standing naked in the middle of the path, looking down at me with a blank expression. He was tall, maybe even 7 feet, much taller than my 5 nothing. He had long matted black and grey hair. There were tufts of it growing from the sides of his arms as well. His skin was very sticky yellow and pale, looking too big for his stature. We made eye contact. His yellow orbs felt like they're looking into my soul. I couldn't move or think. Everything goes silent around me. The next 10 seconds or so seemed like they stretched out for an eternity. We just stood there looking at each other, before he swiftly turned and walked back into the trees. The foliage went undisturbed as he melted through it and disappeared. I honestly expected him to charge at me, or at least try and intimidate me, but he just left. I haven't seen him since either, nor am I too enthusiastic to go out looking. I remember telling my grandma about it, and she said it was probably a drug addict, but something didn't seem right. I've told this story somewhere before, and it really scares me. I've tried looking into Native American folklore, especially the local stuff, but haven't found anything matching the description. I don't know if maybe it's a skinwalker or not, but it truly terrified me. This happened yesterday. My brother and I went for a hike to stave off cabin fever from self-isolation. We chose a pretty remote trail to lower the risk of coming into contact with others. I was walking ahead of my brother, and the gravel on the track was making our footsteps seem really loud. Deep in thought, I was listening to the rhythm of his footstep behind me. About 20 minutes in, I start hearing other footsteps, off faint and getting louder, until they're the same pitch as his, but they're very fast, like the rhythm of someone running. There suddenly came a halt to it, and I could hear the motion of somebody stepping on the gravel. That sudden sharp rocky sound you can imagine. I assumed that there must have been someone running or jogging on the track, and sure enough, I see a shadow on the other side of me appearing. It looks like somebody's head is next to mine, as though they're running behind me. I stopped, turned around to let them pass as the track's very narrow. However, when I turned around, it was just my brother staring back at me. He was confused as to why I'd stopped. So, I asked if he was running a second ago, and he said nah. I asked if there had been anyone behind him, and he said that he wasn't aware of anyone. I thought it was strange, but just let it go and carried on. About 5 minutes later, we came around a corner and there was this smell of pure death. It was very strong, like rotten meat. We figure it's a dead animal. We reach our hike lookout about 20 minutes later, chilled out for a bit, then headed back. We passed the death smell again, and it's around the exact same spot where it happened before. I hear the running sounds again. I ignore it because I'm getting scared now and we pick up the pace to get back to the car. I told my mum and she said that it must have been a dead body and maybe that was their spirit that you could sense. I laughed at the time, but it was more out of fear. I'm really not sure what this is and it still haunts me to this day. I grew up in a very small rural town in Michigan. This place was so small that everybody knew everyone. My high school graduation class consisted of less than 30 people. It was a place with a very small population, but geographically, it wasn't small at all, consisting mostly of wooded areas and open fields. Houses are spread out, and nothing like what you see in the city. I mean, the nearest city was hours away. I lived on a dead-end gravel road. My neighbour's at the very end of the road, and to my left, there's about a 5-minute walk before you meet the others. You could barely see the neighbour's house through the sparse trees. To the right is another neighbour. My uncle and aunt and my favourite cousin actually live about 5 minutes away. I could only see their house if I walked to the end of my driveway. My house was the second to last one on the road, and just before my house was a really long driveway. I suppose you could call it another road, but it led directly to a house behind mine that belonged to a man I'll call Dave. Now there's a large open field, followed by another sparse tree line, and Dave's house is behind that. I could easily see his small house perched on the top of a tiny hill in the distance. I loved growing up there. It was my favourite place in the world. My mum and dad worked in town, and my older brother, my younger sister and I were always left to our own devices growing up. We were always playing outside. My siblings and I are all born within the first half of the 90s, so we grew up during a time where there weren't really cell phones. We didn't have cable TV, just a few channels when we got an antenna. And our parents usually kicked us out of the house from sunrise to sunset because they didn't want us being stuck indoors. Because of this, we often explored the land around the area. Being 90s babies, our parents for some reason trusted us to literally wander everywhere. Never once did they check up on us. Now the house behind us was extremely creepy. We rarely saw anyone come or go, and believe me, they were very nosy and would know if somebody was driving down the road. The upstairs bedroom window overlooked the front of the house, and my sister upstairs' window overlooks the back of the house. We also had a giant set of sliding glass doors at the back of our house that opened up to the back door porch. They were so big it practically took up the whole wall, so we literally saw everything. Despite the neighbour behind us rarely being seen going anywhere or seeing anyone show up there, we just knew he was creepy. We used to call him Creepy Dave, and still do to this day, including my parents. I can't really explain why we started to call him that, but it seems so fitting. We used to walk through the field and along the tree line towards Dave's house. We were careful not to walk all the way up the driveway. We'd usually just play near the tree line and the fields around the area. The fields are owned by a local farm, family friends or my parents, so weren't exactly trespassing onto Dave's property if we stayed just far enough down. Sometimes we would get a little brave and creeped up the road more. I can remember inside the ditches leading up to his driveway, there would be animal bones, fully intact skeletons, even a deer skull. It had all been there long enough to be pure bone. That alone was creepy enough for young kids to see. When I was in middle school, Dave married this woman. I can't remember for the life of her name, but she had 2 children, a daughter I'll call Lisa and son I'll call Dustin. Now they started to ride the bus with me and my siblings to school. They always hated it when the bus drove up the eerie driveway to their house. I can remember one winter, the bus actually got stuck in the snow. The bus driver had to try and shovel us out, and while everyone was stuck waiting for the bus, I happened to look out the window at the barn near the house. It was still dark out, but just starting to turn to dawn, so the sky was bluish, but still dark, and you can see silhouettes. I kid you not, standing there on the second level of the barn, there's creepy Dave holding a pitchfork. He's not even doing anything, he's just staring at us watching. All I can see is his outline. It frightens me so much that I turn my whole body away from the window and start tearing up a bit. My best friend sitting next to me says what's wrong, and I can't even tell her. I don't know what it was, but it scared me so badly. I don't know if anybody else saw him up there, but I still picture it. That was the last time I actually saw Dave for myself, but unfortunately, he didn't disappear fully from our lives. I used to stay up late in middle school watching movies and reading. I've always been a night owl, and sometimes my sister and I would stay up on the weekends all night watching films. One night it's very late. After 3 AM, my sister had fallen asleep, but I was still awake. All of a sudden, we hear a very loud pounding coming from the door that led to our garage. We had a huge bay window in the living room, and a front door to the left of it. Our garage was on the right. Our window faces a driveway, and we have multiple dogs, so whoever this was come from behind the house, crept into our garage so the dogs don't know. I was so scared. My sister starts crying. I started screaming for my dad. He come running out of his bedroom in his underwear holding a shotgun. He went to the door and it's Dave's wife, crying hysterically. I have no idea what happened, but my dad never even told me, and the cops show up. Over time, this happened a few more times. It got to the point where my sister and I stopped sleeping in the living room. And eventually one night, my dad told Dave's wife she needs to stop coming running to our home for help and needed to go to the other neighbours. Thinking back, I feel bad, but my dad was clearly worried about us. These occurrences stopped for a while until one morning, I walked downstairs to SWAT vans parked around the road, men in uniforms with vests and guns crouching in the backyards, and they're pointing directly towards Dave's house. I freaked out. I ran into the living room, into the front entrance, and my dad was standing there with a sheriff. The sheriff had been telling my dad that during the night, Dave held his wife and daughter at gunpoint. I'm not sure where her son was, but he hadn't been there. Eventually, this man in his drunken fit of rage blacked out and passed out, and the wife and daughter escaped. I'm still not sure which neighbour they went to, but the cops are called. Upon getting there, he actually shot at them, and that's when the SWAT was called in. I suppose sneaking through my yard across the field was their way to get an element of surprise, but hell, how is a young girl supposed to know what to do when all this is going on? Dave went to prison and I have no idea of the outcome, nor his family. The kids never went back to school. Apparently he's out now but never come back here. All I know is his creepy house is still there, and it's been abandoned for ages. This was a few years ago during my freshman year of college. A couple weeks into school, this girl I had class with asked me if I wanted to go to a concert. She'd been given 2 tickets as a gift, and still being early in the school year, I didn't really have friends, nor did she, so we decided to go. We live in a large city, and the concert was in a small town about an hour away by train. We get to know each other on the way there, and by the time we get off the train, it's very dark. The street lamps are sparse. We're dressed in our outfits for the concert and the venue's about a 10-minute walk away. Neither of us had ever been out of town before, and we're having some trouble using Google Maps to figure out what direction to head in. I, generally being pretty wary of strangers, am content to continue struggling with my phone map. However, my new friend decides to ask a man on the street for help. He looks like he's in his 30s, about 6 feet tall, blonde, and he's wearing a suit with no tie, and the top couple of buttons are undone. He tells us he knows where the venue is and can get us there. He says, do we want to walk? Now he says what are our names and how old are we, and where are we from. Not necessarily creepy, but I'm getting a bad vibe. It's dark. The streets become practically empty from the train station. We end up reaching an intersection, and he starts to turn right. I'd continued to look on Google Maps once we started walking, and having become better orientated, we're now moving. I know that we need to take a left. I say this, but he says, nah, you're wrong. And I say I'm looking at the map, but he says it must have gotten confused. We turn left and he continues walking with us, assuring us that now he knows where he's going. The map says a concert's up ahead, and in the distance, I can see people all heading in the same direction. Again, our guide says that this is wrong, and he starts walking into a very secluded area near the woods. My friend is starting to get worried, and looks very superstitious. I'm gonna leave that in. My friend has also become suspicious, and we tell him that we're gonna continue straight. He insists that the venue is through the parking lot, and when we point out to the people up ahead, he says it's a shortcut, it's much quicker. We thank him for his help and keep walking. As we leave him, he stands there in the parking lot yelling, "You guys are gonna get lost. You need help." Luckily, he didn't follow us and stopped yelling once we got closer to the crowd. We got to the venue soon after, had a great time at the concert, and I'm scared he'd be waiting for us. Luckily, he never found us again. I'm positive if we went into the woods, something very bad would have happened. My family and I have been hunting on the same property in East Texas for over 10 years. I love Texas. And we've had some really creepy encounters with some of the locals. This property we hunt on is timber company land. It's way off the beaten path down some dirty roads. No power, no running water, no sewer. There's only a few people that live in the area, only scattered around some hunting camps. Our closest neighbours live in a trailer about a mile away, and we've come to call this a meth house. Now I'm not sure if it's really a meth house, but it wouldn't be hard to believe that was happening there. Now this place has always been odd. There is a trailer sitting in the middle of a pine clearing. The brush is fairly overgrown around the trailer, almost as if the property is abandoned. There have always been broken down cars and other junks grown around the front. Cow skulls and hip bones are attached to a pine tree going off about 20 feet. It started out maybe 10, and over the 10 years has grown out to about 20. Now for a long time, the strangest thing about that place is the vibe you get. In 2017, things get weirder. The front yard collection began to grow. A rotted out taxidermy of wild hogs was added to the skull tree. A doll's head was fixed with horns onto some kind of stick in the ground, which we called the devil baby. There's 3 tripods about 12 feet high, each erected around the trailer made out of pine trunks. One day when we drove by, we noticed that from one of these tripods hung the spinal column and rib cage of we don't know what. We thought originally they were using the tripods to hang and clear deer, but the same bones have been hung there for over a year now, and someone would usually get rid of this. So, we've had no encounters with the residents and don't even know what they look like or if they actually lived there long term. This place was creepy. they seemed to keep to themselves. Until later in that season we had 2 creepy encounters. The first happened to my good friend. He had made a quick day trip with his wife up to the property to fill feeders and ride 4-wheelers. To get to the spot, he has to get on the dirt road and drive past the meth house. His spot is only a few hundred yards away from the house. While they were doing their thing, they began to hear some strange noises. And as he listened closer, he could hear high-pitched gibberish between 3 voices yelling weird words in Arabic and with Jesus mixed in. They decided to get on the 4-wheeler and investigate. They found 2 men squatted down besides a large mud pile in front of the house. They were splashing and bouncing around while furiously speaking gibberish. Once they noticed a 4-wheeler, they stopped and stared like animals. My buddy quickly took off. The second encounter happened to me and my brother. We were up there alone for the weekend and were relaxing by the fire on a pitch black night after a long day's hunt. We began to hear something strange in the distance. It was pipe organ music. It wasn't a recording of a pipe organ, but somebody actually playing one. They were missing notes and sporadically starting and stopping. We laughed about how it was like something out of a horror film, but the music continues for hours. Then all of a sudden, we hear crashing through the brush. Now we're actually in a very thick area of brush. It is between our camp and the direction of our house. This doesn't sound like the usual spooked deer or armadillo roaming around, or hogs even. It's made by something very large. Now the rest of the night it's quiet, and there's no more organ music, and we don't know what caused this. Now not too much has happened since then, but we've made a point never to go there alone, but to maybe one day scout it out overnight. The summer before 2nd grade, my family and I moved into Olympia, WA. I with my parents and my older sister back then. My sister is 2 years older than me, so she would have been in the 4th grade. My sister celebrated her 10th birthday that same year by having a handful of friends over for a sleepover. We owned a trampoline back then and often had sleepovers and used the trampoline during the summer months. We lived near a forest. Now we have many fond memories of sleeping on the trampoline under the stars, but this was not one of those fond memories. Seeing as it was my sister's party, I was younger, and the annoying brother am not invited to the trampoline party. I do, however, remember how the events unfolded. It all began when around 6 or so girls came fleeing inside screaming about a man in the woods. Our backyard at this house was fenced off to the left and right side, but was not fenced on the backside as our backyard continued into a beautiful forest backdrop. According to the girls, as they're out on the trampoline enjoying their sleepover, a man in a yellow rain jacket appeared in the woods. The random creepy man proceeded to stand there in the woods and stare at the 6, 10-year-old girls the whole time they're out there. He didn't respond to them when they attempted addressing him or even break eye contact. It was at this point that the girls were so scared they collectively ran as fast as they could inside. After the girls relayed their experience to my parents and I, the 3 of us reached to the window to see this man. When we get to the window, all we can see is a glimpse of the yellow jacket as he disappeared further into the forest, beyond the borderline of the neighbouring fence, out of sight. My dad sprinted outside yelling at the man, threatening him, calling the police but we can't see him. My parents did call the police and filed a report, but nothing ever come of it. After this experience, our parents thought twice about letting us sleep on the trampoline at night. We ended up moving a year later. When I was quite young, maybe 9 or 10, my mum, sister, who's about 4 or 5, and I went for a walk in the forest. It was a large forest, well known for camping and having picnics, and We had walked through there many times before. The three of us walked for quite some time until we found a spot to have a picnic. After eating our food, we explored the various mushrooms and trees dotted around the place. When it started to roll over into late afternoon, we decided it was time to head back, and we made the walk back to the forest. There was always an eerie feeling when you're in the forest, in any forest no matter where. When we arrived back, we're shocked to see police cars everywhere and hear sirens. We had no idea what happened, but nevertheless, we got back into our car and drove home. I was wondering what could have happened the entire night back, when finally, my questions are answered. My mum and I sat down to watch the 7 o'clock news and found out that while we're having a picnic, the police had discovered a body buried in a shallow grave in that very forest. The reporter explained that the men involved were doing stuff with drugs and other criminal activities. As I was quite young when all this occurred, I didn't think much of it. Sure, I was creeped out, but I didn't completely understand it. Looking back now, it gives me chills thinking about it. I often wonder what would have happened if we were the ones to discover the body. I was in the kitchen the night before last, washing up some plates for dinner, when I glanced out of the window in front of the sink and saw someone standing at the far end of my own yard. From what I could tell, it looks like a man of average build, with a scruffy appearance. He was essentially behind my neighbour's tool shed, which is on the right side of the border of my property, and so I thought that he might be somebody they knew. It was dark and he was quite a distance away, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. His back was mostly turned to me, but by his movements it looked as though he was panting at the ground with a shovel, as if he just buried something and was covering up. This raised my suspicion a bit, so I called my neighbours to ask if they're aware that somebody's behind the shed. They said they're not, and the husband went outside to investigate. I saw my neighbour open his door, and the man saw/heard it and bolts off into the woods. I went outside to meet my neighbour and see if there is evidence of what the man had been doing. So we both arrive at the spot, and I turned to tell my neighbour that I saw a man that fled into the woods. We look down at the ground and there's indeed fresh dirt where somebody was digging. My neighbour gets a shovel, which the man actually dropped when he ran off, and we start digging nervously. We're both expecting to find out something very gruesome, no doubt. However, what we dug up has actually left us with more questions than answers. It was a plastic bag with something softball-sized and heavy. We dump out the contents, a rock, painted red with a smiley face. Why would somebody be out here trespassing to bury a painted rock and a button? And it's painted on the rock, not blood. It's not a murder weapon as far as we can tell. Still, the neighbour and I actually report this to law enforcement and they come back to take a statement. They take the rock and button, just in case it's connected to a crime. The whole ordeal has made me on edge, to be honest. Why on earth would somebody bury something like that, especially in the dark? This didn't dawn on me until I had my own children and have hence been vigilant with stranger danger. Suddenly, one day, I sat up and realised the actual danger I was in and how close I come to God knows what. I was about 10 and staying with my grandmother, something I did and loved for a week every holidays. My grandma lived in a new suburb on the outskirts of our city. Because it was new, there were a lot of new immigrants who started moving into the area. There was a wave of immigration from Lebanon due to the war there, asylum seekers. There was a very white Australia at the time, so my 10-year-old mind found those people bizarre and different. Anyway, I was sort of playing by myself with these new kids in the church parking lot near my grandma's. I was the only blonde Anglo out of about 20 kids my age, but they ranged up to about 12. I think that's why I may have been singled out, because I stood out. So this little girl about my age was sort of trying to play with me. She was so foreign to me with her hijab and long black dress in the 40-degree Australian summer, so I blurt out, "Why are you wearing that dress?" I was just confused by it and couldn't understand it. Then, when I look around to see if anyone heard me, I see a man stood there staring at me who's Anglo. I thought at the time he heard me. I was so ashamed and thought that he might come over to speak about my potentially mean comment, or tell my grandma, or even worse, ring my parents. But my 10-year-old head at the time thought that he was watching me from 10 meters away out of annoyance. He's just by a tree line, but he's been there for over 2 or 3 hours. Anyway, it starts getting dark. Everyone started to disperse for bath, dinner and bedtime. I got up and started walking back. The man started to follow me. He followed me to my grandma's and I ran inside and shut and locked the door behind me. I was waiting for his knocks to tell my grandma my crime, but instead, nothing came. He must have changed his mind, I thought to myself, but as I took a sneak peek out of the window, I saw him go down to the side of the house. Oh no, he's going in the back door to tell her. The shame. For nothing. Oh, thank God. Just as I thought I'm about to go to bed and forget about this, I look out the window and there he was, smoking, standing under the tree line. Still weighing up whether to tell my grandma, I kept trying to sneak peeks at him and see if he's gone so I can fall asleep. I decide to go to bed. Now the next morning, my grandma runs in. Now, the fly screen is off of the windows. Now, she thinks I must have done it because they can't fall off on their own. She also said I was not to ever try and force the window open again. Now, all the wood around the windows has been chopped and broken. I said I didn't do it, and she doesn't believe me. She literally doesn't believe me in the slightest. And, you know, I never connected that at the time that it was a man trying to get in. But it must have been, because it was trying to get into my window and I saw him there. I never really thought anything of it. But now I'm an adult, I'm fully aware of what could have happened and it really terrifies me. A stint of warm weather came through our area a few weeks ago, so my family and I decided to hike our local Appalachian trail. We're 25 minutes into our hike when my wife stops abruptly as if she was spooked. With my daughter sitting in her hiking seat attached to my backpack, I slowly shift up in the direction of my wife. What we come across was a large rock off the trail that had been spray painted with a Bible scripture. It read out, Neem Neem Ketul, Usharan, Daniel 5:23-28. The urgent style with the writing and intensity is what unsettled my wife. It was just odd to see this grafted so far off the path, but, however, Appalachia attracts all walks of life. I looked up to the interpretation and it goes, Meme. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed in the balances and found waiting and wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. As I'm looking this up, my wife wants to keep walking and starts up the trail. I then hear cracks of branches just behind me. I just kept that interpretation to myself as I know it will really just creep out my wife. Another mile into the trail, I hear the crackle of branches behind us. In the intelligence community, there's a rule of thumb regarding being tracked by a person or car. 1 time it's an accident, 2 coincidence, 3 enemy action. Coincidentally, this is probably what's happening, I think, and it might just be a deer trying to follow us. So I turn around to whatever's making those noises, and in the woods off the trail, I spot what appeared to be a man crouching over messing with something in his bag. But he's whistling to himself. I thought, maybe he's just getting something and don't think much of it. But I knew that the guy'd been behind us for quite some time now, because of the first time I heard the sound. Now not even 100 feet further down the trail, yet again, I hear another rustle. 3rd time. I turn 180 degrees. The man's about 20 feet in front of me, adjacent to the trail. I look at him. He doesn't make eye contact, just looks sporadically at different things, from the ground beneath him, to the trees, and then to the sky. While looking to the sky, he says the days of Babylon are numbered. I reply cold and cynically, "Are you lost, buddy?" And I can feel the adrenaline. My ears are ringing and my heart is beating double time. Now, I'm starting to think I'll have to defend my family from a lunatic, but he mumbles, giggles, and turns into the woods, never to be seen again. So this happened last summer. It was a hot day, and I just got off work around 7 PM and decided to take my dog for a run in the forest reserve near my home. When you start out on the path, it's very open and near a busy street, but as you go further into the path, you are deep in the forest and surrounded by trees. The sun was starting to set at this point, but I figured I would get a quick 2 miles in so my dog could get some energy out. It was about a mile into my run when I started to hear a man just behind the trees. He hops out of nowhere with a cigarette and says, "Can you join me on my run?" I wonder why this man is behind a tree alone. My heart starts racing and I realize that it's almost dark and no one's on the path and there's no cars around in the parking lot. I say no thank you and continue to run, trying not to look panicked. He starts to get closer to me, and my 1-year-old Staffy pit lunges towards him. My dog is extremely playful and gets excited to see people, so lunges towards him, just wanting to pet him. However, he looks intimidating, so the guy thought he was attacking. He backs up and I start running faster down the path, and I keep looking back. I stopped out of breath and frantically called my fiance who's at work. He didn't answer. I decided I didn't want to go any further down the path and further into the forest, so wait a few minutes and go back with my phone in my hand ready to dial the police. I get to the top of the hill and see the man jumping into the passenger side of a white van, speeding off. I always think to myself, what would have happened if I didn't have my dog with me that day? This incident occurred last spring. Let me set the scene and give a bit of backstory. I was driving from Minnesota to Iowa for a music festival and decided to leave on Thursday because 1, generally prefer road tripping at night, and 2, I wanted to get to the festival grounds as early as possible to secure a good camping spot. All is going well. I'm about 2 hours away from Des Moines and I realise I've really got to pee. Now for those of you unfamiliar with driving long, mostly rural interstate highways, rest areas can be a godsend when the gas stations are few and far between. So I see a sign for a rest area coming up in 2 miles. Perfect. I pull in and there's maybe 3 other cars in the lot. Things are generally quiet and on the first glance, nothing seems out of the ordinary or anything. However, I have just a general feeling of unease as I pull into the park. And I'm not one to ignore my instinct, but I really have the urge to pee. Luckily, my brother has just given me this taser because he knows I like to go adventures in often wooded areas, usually at night, and he wants me to be safe. So I grab it quick, just in case, and run to the bathroom. Not 30 seconds after I close my stall door, I hear someone yelling either babe or a name. It's unintelligible, just they're hollering at me and I don't know what they're saying, but they sound unstable. At this point, my heart starts beating really fast, and I'm just hoping he leaves the general building, but no, I hear the main door to the woman's stall literally kick open, and of course, he comes to the only stall and starts yelling at me. He finally says something I can make out. I'm looking for my girlfriend. So I say, I don't know you, go away. He then shouts at me, what's my name? The dude's clearly not in the right state of mind. At this point, he starts shaking my freaking stall door. So I turn on the taser and repeat, get out, before hitting the little button that makes the taser do its thing. Luckily, as I hoped, just the sound was enough for him to quickly run out. I stayed there for 10 minutes trying to regain control of my composure, and then quickly walked out to my vehicle, taser ready, and I immediately get out of there. What scares me is he almost knew what the taser sound was to immediately flee like it's happened before. I'm just so glad I had that taser because God knows what would have happened if I didn't have it on me that day. I was playing disc golf, aka frisbee golf, by myself one day, and I lost a disc in the woods. As I was looking for it, I heard a woman yell, "You're crazy," and a guy responded with something to, "You're supposed to keep your heart open." How is this keeping your heart open? They're on the path on the other side of the trees, and the woman's walking away from the guy. I heard someone walking through the woods towards me. It was a guy. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "Hey, you're Luke, aren't you?" And I said nah, and said my actual name for some reason. He shook my hand and said, "What are you doing?" "Listening." I told him, "No, I'm looking for a disc." He was like, "Oh, you're a disc golfer, huh?" He said something along them lines, but I didn't really know what to make of it. Then he looked me in the eyes and calmly said, "You're screwed. You don't even know it. We know too much and you're screwed." It's at this point I turned, walked away, and never come back again. I've never been to that park again since. Now, I'm somebody who's had the pleasure of working as a park ranger for a number of years. Now, I don't think you can beat a job like this, well that's for me anyway. Just being out in nature alone, getting some of the views that you do, I think really outweighs any of the benefits of most other jobs. Now, like in most jobs, I had my fair share of weird experiences, but from my experience as a ranger, they were mostly positive. In fact, massively outweighing anything negative. I had one or two weird things happen, but nothing too bad that I couldn't really explain. I even had some encounters with wild animals, but that was cool, I guess, in the end. I did have a strange thing that I'd like to share with everybody today, just to get your view on it and ask what you think happened. Now, I wasn't actually on duty on this particular day. I was on a trip with a friend of mine. Now, we're just going on a hiking trip, nothing too out of the ordinary. Now, destination was what my friend supposed were some cool cabins he'd seen before, that apparently people didn't use anymore, but we were welcome to stay in. I never questioned why we were welcome to stay there. I did until a few days before, and he said, well, nobody else uses them. And I should have said no to this idea, but to be honest, I thought it was a pretty cool thing to do. I'd known this friend for a number of years, and we used to train together at the gym. To be honest, he was always late, and it was kind of annoying, but I guess that's just how he is. And funnily enough, before we set out on this adventure, he was late too. But I was kind of expecting it, so actually showed up later than the agreed time that we were going to meet. Now, my friend also likes being in the outdoors, but he hasn't played the game for as long as me, and he's not really as good at it. He's pretty good being outside, but to be honest, he often has to ask me for help. But he can be brave sometimes, and I think that's important. And he has the adventurous spirit in him. So we set out on the first part of our hike, and everything's pretty good. We ended up going quite a long way off the path because we really want to have an adventure here. And even if there might be some danger, we're kind of up for it. Now, we probably hiked out for the first day at a pretty good speed, until eventually my friend got a bit tired. He hasn't really got good cardiovascular fitness, and I could really tell on this part of the journey. Every so often we'd have to stop, and I basically ended up taking some of the load off of him. I don't know, it just made it a little bit easier for what we were doing. Now, as we're walking, everything's normal, and we get to our first camping spot. It's quite a cool area, and nothing's out of the ordinary here. We feel pretty good and relaxed, and we're just sharing stories of funny things that happened in our time. I remembered one really funny thing was a guy that was a little bit weird, and another guy that was weird but aggressive sometimes got stuck in the same room together. We don't know how we broke the door, but funnily enough it was on a Friday evening, so it meant if we left them there, nobody probably would have come to rescue them. One of my friends was just sitting there completely calm and normal, just annoyed, and the other one was staring at us through the glass, which we found hilarious. It was a really good college memory, I guess, and one that I cherish, and I wish we'd taken a picture of it. We kept on reminiscing about the old days and just saying what we wanted to do. And my friend said that he wanted to get in some kind of design jobs, but he wasn't sure what, because he was changing lanes. He used to work as an engineer to a degree, but he didn't really enjoy it. You know when people act too rough and broody? He said it was kind of like that constantly, and it just became annoying and gave him a headache, and I told him that I could understand. Now, I'd also worked in similar jobs before, and it used to do my head in a bit. But, I don't know, I guess it's each to their own. So we just talked about a number of different things, and my friend also said he wants to get back into training. Now the thing was, I'd lost a lot of my gym gains at the time from working, so I didn't really know how I felt about starting again, but we're just talking about things like this and having a really grand old time. We eventually fall off to sleep and wake up the next day for the part 2 of the hike. Now this part of the hike actually takes us into a different terrain. This time, we're going to be walking through somewhere that's got larger trees, and I guess just more life around us. It's kind of cool because when we're walking we can see some butterflies and things like that, which really set the tone for a nice hike. Now again, this friend doesn't really know as much as I do, so I'm pretty much leading the way here, just he's given me the general direction of the cabins. He then decides to tell me that there's been reports of weird things happening around those cabins. Apparently, there's some weird people that live around there that you have to be careful of, and animals and things like that, but I don't really believe it too much. Especially doing the job that I do, I know it's very, very rare that you'll meet anybody out in the woods, but most of the times they've just become lost and actually need your help. We're not seeing any aliens or things like that, or ghosts or anything, so I'm pretty confident and just tell my friend to kind of knock it off a bit and stay focused. As we're walking too, my friend constantly tells me that he thinks we're being followed by an animal. I ask him what kind of animal and he says I don't know. Every so often I kind of see it in the background, but I'm not really sure what it is. I ask him to describe it and he says he can just see a silhouette almost tracing us every so often. And he says that he could have sworn as he fell asleep the previous night, he saw something staring at him with somewhat glowing eyes. I then tell him that this was probably some kind of insect or reflection and not to worry about it too much, and he doesn't worry much. My friend isn't much of a worrier too. He could kind of laugh off anything and I actually enjoyed being around people like that. It just made trips like these a lot more pleasant, to be honest, and it was something that I could enjoy. Now, we continue on our great adventure, and we don't seem to be getting much closer to these cabins. I say, hey, can you put a swimming pool in mine? And my friend says, what? I say, you're going to give me a basketball court soon. My friend then finally catches on that I'm joking with him and just saying that it's all in his head. I didn't believe him. I was completely convinced that we weren't going to find any cabins or anything and that we're just going to be out here and use our tents. That's why I made sure that I brought a really good tent with me. Now, one bizarre thing that I do realise while we're walking is there seems to be quite a big bird around. Every so often, just out of my peripheral vision, I can catch what seems to be quite a large bird flying away every so often, but not making too much noise. You can only really hear it if you notice and stop for a few moments, but I don't know, it just seemed a little weird. I didn't know that there was supposed to be any big birds out here, but maybe it's an eagle or something. So with this in mind, I'm a little bit more observant and I continue walking on. We have quite a lot of forest up ahead of us. We're on quite a nice path, but there is a bit of a drop that leads into some running water next to us, so we have to be careful. I also don't want to hike in the night because I know if we fall down there within seconds you could get carried away by the rapids and probably never seen again. My friend was actually worried of this too, and he told me a couple of times, and I say, yeah, we're gonna get back soon, don't worry about it, buddy. Now, we keep on walking through what seems to be impossibly tall trees and denser forest. It's quite nice, but it's rained recently and it's a bit annoying because every time that we're walking we're getting water on our faces. Also, the path that we're walking on, if you could call it that, is getting narrower and narrower, and it's becoming quite annoying trying to get through to the camping site. I really don't want to have to set up camp randomly, but I can't really see many clearings where we are. I decide that the best option is just to keep on going, and hopefully we're going to find an area that has a flat opening, or somewhere that we can get to that we're not going to be in trouble if we tent into the side of it. After probably another 10 more minutes of walking, we finally come up to a relative clear zone. I start setting up the tent and my friend starts trying to get dinner ready. He's struggling at first and I have to stop and help him, and we agree to switch roles. I eventually get the food on pretty quick and I'm excited to tuck into it. Now, while I'm doing so, I say some joke to my friend and he doesn't reply. I then say it again and I don't hear anything back from him, which I think is pretty odd, and I go over to him. He seems to be locked into one place, almost fixated, and I can't tell exactly what he's looking at. It takes me a couple of seconds and he just points in a direction, and to my amazement, there seems to be the silhouette of something stalking us almost. It's a bit hard to describe, but it's a very dark silhouette just off in the tree line, kind of peering over at us, but I know this isn't possible. There shouldn't be anybody out here. Plus we haven't seen anybody on the whole first day and second of our hike, so this is pretty weird. I go to wave and my friend looks at me like I've just committed an atrocity in front of him. I'm not feeling as scared as he is, but weirdly this figure doesn't move. It looks like quite a tall person, like a man specifically, maybe 6.5 feet tall, wearing a dark black coat, but I can't really see much else. One thing I noticed about this person is that they have very, very broad shoulders, and I thought maybe they had something in there. It almost looked like they were wearing it with a coat hanger, it was that strange. And silently, it slowly turns away and walks back into the forest. Okay, now that's pretty odd. I look at my friend and he nods at me, and we retreat back towards our campsite. I say, hey, don't worry about it, it's probably just another hiker that doesn't want to be seen, or maybe he's hunting or something like that. I stumble on my words, now getting a little bit worried as I hear a twig snap near me. My friend says, hey, we've got to head back, but I say, no, we can't. We're going to have to hike in the dark for literally a day if we do this. Somewhat frustrated, my friend sits down and I say, look, we should probably just keep watch out this night just to make sure nothing happens, but don't worry. I've been in situations like this before with my job, and I know the best thing to do is to remain calm and not panic, and my friend reluctantly agrees. We eventually get ready to sleep and we stay on watch for a couple of hours before getting into the tent. Now, I managed to drift off, then wake up again, hearing some kind of rustling in the trees. I wake up very dazed and probably exhausted from the hike to this point. Maybe not exhausted, but very tired, and I peer out, and I can just about make out some red glowing things in the distance. I pull my head down and rub my eyes, but when I look up again, it's gone. I don't really know what this is, and it's pretty confusing, to be honest. I ended up sitting there for another 5 or 10 minutes just trying to make out anything in the inky blackness around me, but all I can see is the stars now as my eyes adjust. Now, a little bit confused, I just put it down to being tired and weary and head back inside my tent. I wake up the next day and my friend doesn't have any idea about any of it. I start saying, "Hey, did you hear or see anything?" And he said, No, I slept like really well, man. Honestly, I felt good. And I say, "Yeah, right," and decide not to tell him about the thing that I've just seen. I don't want to scare my friend too much, but I've got to admit it to you guys, this is really weird. I kind of know if I see things when I'm tired, because it never happens, so this is weird. Now we pack up our things and continue on the next part of our journey. This should take us into the exact area that the cabins exist in my friend's head are. I can't wait to clown him about it, and I'm constantly making jokes about it. My friend takes it well and starts to joke back with me. We come up to a small bridge which I didn't notice before that looks absolutely ancient, which I think is pretty cool. My friend's too scared to go across it, and I kind of just walk along the edges and make it across. He then does the same as well, but says, "Hey, do you see that?" And I say, "What?" He then looks at me dead in the face and says, "I saw something that doesn't look right." I said, "Where?" He said, "It's gone now." I said, "For a second, what did you see?" And he tells me, "Well, just ahead of where we're walking, I swear to God, I saw a large I don't know what this thing was, but big tall person wearing some kind of weird cloak or something, just staring at us before walking behind a tree and disappearing." I say, "Look, we've got to get to the bottom of this," and I say that I'm going to press forward. Now, I didn't really believe my friend again because he's so paranoid that I'm certain this is only existing in his mind. I walk a little bit further ahead and eventually make it to the exact spot that my friend supposed that he saw somebody, and there's absolutely nothing there once again. I just turn around and look at my friend and put my hands up as if to say, "Well?" And he shakes his head and said, "God, I must just be dehydrated or something, but I was convinced I saw something." I say, "Yeah, just don't worry about it, let's just get out of here." And he agrees. I then say, "We've got your cabin to look forward to," and he starts to get a bit annoyed. I decide to cut off the jokes and we continue going. Now, I've got to admit, I was feeling a little more unsettled than I was at the start of the trip. I still haven't told my friend about what I'd seen in the night, or at least thought I did, but it was pretty weird. Now, the chances of somebody actually being out here following us is very low, because they'd have to be hiking and camping parallel to us. Now, it's very improbable, but it would mean if it was the case, then we might be in some kind of trouble here. I was starting to get a bit worried, but luckily I had a satellite phone, so if we needed help I could probably radio in for some, or at least report what had happened. Now we make it up to the area where the cabins are, and there's nothing. I then start bursting out laughing, and my friend says, "Why are you laughing? They're literally there." I then say, "Where?" And to my amazement, there are about a set of 5 or 6 cabins that have been abandoned long ago, just off in the distance. Stunned, I then be completely quiet and just laugh at the fact that I didn't see those. I say sorry to my friend and he says, "Yeah, it's fine, it's cool, let's just go over there." Now, I was a little bit underwhelmed because they just look like normal regular old cabins, but my friend seems quite excited at this find. Now, this is meant to be the highlight of our adventure, but I guess it was kind of overshadowed by the weird things that were happening at this point. Now, we eventually make it up towards it, and We're not too far away when I decide to stop and scout out the area. I'm looking around and I can't believe it. There up on one of the hills is someone standing there staring at us. Again with very broad shoulders, and this time seeming to be wearing some kind of feathered coat, almost like a grey-black colour. Now, I kid you not, I'm sure I could just about see some kind of glowing red dots around where his face should have been. My friend is just going on about something else and stops, wondering why I'm not replying, and then we both look and stare up in the same area. Now, my friend drops his bottle on the floor and quickly jumps next to me, and whatever this thing is, slowly turns away and over the hill. Now at this point I'm getting a bit worried and night's starting to set in, and I haven't really got a good visual on what this thing is. Now I'm pretty sure this is just a lost hiker and we're staring at their headlamp, and this is what I say to my friend, but he has a different theory on it, saying this is something different. Now I haven't really got the best of eyes, but my friend does, and he's convinced that this isn't a person. I then tell him just to knock it off, and then we realise that night's only a couple of minutes away. The sun is just about setting over the horizon, and we're left with a choice, and that's a single choice, just to set in for the night. My friend then says, no, we gotta hike out of here, and I say, yeah, with that thing out there, and he kind of silently agrees with me, and he sighs and starts to set up the tent. I say, no, let's go inside one of these cabins, it's gotta be a lot safer, at least we have a door, and my friend agrees. We both split off and start searching out for a suitable cabin, aka one that hasn't got too many things inside it and at least a closed-in door. And for the first one that I explore, there's nothing there, just some broken out windows and a broken in door. It's very easy for animals to be in here, and it's obvious that there was some mice or rats or something, because there's little marks around some of the doors and there's a hole in the wall, and I decide that we're not going to share it with them. They'd probably be sleeping under the thing when we're in it, and I don't want that, even if we've got a tent. And then go over to another cabin, and as I go in there, I have a strange feeling that something's off with this one. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's just a really weird feeling that come over me. Also, something smells off. It doesn't really smell like something died, but it's almost like a unique alien smell that I've never smelled before. It's really difficult to describe, but strong enough that you notice it, but hard to put a finger on, but not a good smell. I quickly leave that cabin. Now, I then hear my friend calling over and he says, hey, I think we've got one. I walk over to my buddy and he's found a pretty cool one. It's got the windows and the door closes still, and it doesn't seem as though there's been any animals in here. Well, this is it. Do you want to sleep outside or in here? My friend then drops the tent down and starts assembling it, and I begin helping him. While we're doing this, I can't help but constantly look over my shoulder, and I tell my friend that I need a break, and I go outside and just stare over at the hill. I'm half expecting that thing to come running down it after us, or that person, but nothing happens. I don't know, it's pretty weird. I stay there for a good 5 minutes, letting my eyes adjust fully to the darkness, but nothing happens. I then turn around and I have a feeling that something's watching me. I look off to another ridgeline and I can just about make out some kind of inky dots slowly going behind the hill, out of sight. It almost looks like when a cat or something's trying not to be seen and ducks down, but I was pretty sure of what I'd seen. Now, I don't want to alert my friend, but I don't know whether this is a dangerous animal, but we should be fine because if we close the cabin door and put some bags against it, nothing's really going to get in here. So, I quickly go and help my friend continue assembling the tent. It didn't take long and we've pretty much got that done, and we both sit in there and start to barricade ourselves in, thinking how weird this is. Now, My friend says that we should just go now and set off, but I keep telling him, do you know where you're going for a start? Do you know how dangerous it is to night hike? And we're going to have to do this all night, then hike again in the day, then sleep. And this thing could still be out here, whatever this person is, or whatever it is. My friend then says, yeah, you're right. And we decide to start drinking a little bit. We have some alcohol, and we just wanted some Dutch courage, but we only have a shot or two each, which really isn't that much for us. Now, trying to make light of the situation, my friend pretends that he's really drunk, and I think it's funny, and I do the same. Now, it was all funny until I actually needed to pee and I had to go back out there. Now, I really don't want my friend to realise how scared that I've become, but my god, I did not want to leave that tent. But now I don't really have a choice. I tell my friend that I'm going to pee and ask him to keep guard, and he says, yeah, I will, and I head out. Now, not long after heading out, I have the feeling that I'm being watched once again. I then look over at my buddy, and he zipped himself up in the tent, and he's being a coward, which I laugh about and sigh, thinking, yeah, that's some really good backup. After finishing my business, I go back and tell my friend about the weird feeling I've got, and he agrees to come out with me this time. Now, both of us are standing probably 10 feet away from the cabin, and just trying to get a good idea of our surroundings and make out exactly what's happening. Now, my friend says, hey, did you hear that? And I say, what? Much louder than him. And then I can hear a strange rattling sound, almost like a rattlesnake mixed with a hiss. It's really weird, and it sounds quite far away at first. Now, I stood there absolutely dumbfounded with my friend, trying to make sense of this for another 4 or 5 minutes in complete silence. Now, I know you hear about people saying that they hear silence in weird situations, but this was the opposite. The forest was still alive with sound, and maybe, I don't know, that added to the suspense of the whole thing, but it felt very off. Then, we hear the sound again, followed with 3 distinct clicks, and the sound of movement. This time it was closer than before, but still not enough to cause any panic. I start slowly backing up now, and then get some bravery and say, hey, let's go forward a bit. If this is a person, we don't want them to think we're scared of them and some kind of victim. And we both start to advance now, with my friend next to me. I pick up a rock, and so does my friend. Not like it's really going to do much if somebody's armed with a gun or knife, but hey, if I can get a rock in, at least I've done something. Now, again, we hear the sound, just much closer this time, to one of the cabins adjacent to our one. Now, it'd be impossible to know exactly where it was, but I'm sure this thing darted behind one. I could just about make out some kind of glowing eyes again, but much taller than I thought. It looked like these eyes were 7 feet off of the ground, and there it was again. Now, petrified, I can see this thing slowly put its head round the corner. It was almost like staring at a bear, but with eyes that illuminated slightly. Now, this didn't make sense. There wasn't enough moonlight for them to glow like this, so what was this? It kind of looked more like a bird now thinking of it, but it was so odd. Still covered in these feathers, or I don't know what you'd call it, or if this was a person wearing a Halloween costume, or God knows what this is. And I start to slowly advance towards it slightly. I'm very surprised at what I'm seeing, and then again, I can hear a loud thud now, followed by silence. I then start to slowly back up, and funnily enough, my friend's already in the cabin again, and I realise that all of this heroic bravery has been done on my own. My friend says, hey, get back in here. And I start to swear at him, but stop, as it breaks my concentration, and I turn around again, trying to see where this person's gone. I then start to slowly step backwards, and I can't see this thing. I manage to make it behind a tree and get into some more cover, and as I peer around it, I can see the eyes glowing back at me from another tree, closer this time. I don't know how much more of this I can bear. There's a little voice in my head that's telling me just stay calm and breathe, and that's what I'm trying my best to do. Now, I'm really worried in this moment, and I really don't know what to think of the situation. I'm still not close enough to the cabin to be safe, and I don't know if I'm safe with this thing, but one thing I do know is when I get back in there, I'm a lot safer. I'm now worried because this thing seems to move so quick and without making sound that I don't think I can get back in time. I then tell my friend, "You've got to cover me." And he says, "What?" I say, "Just go near the door." And surprisingly, he actually does. And I start slowly backing in. And that's when that thing starts moving towards us now. I sprint inside the cabin and my friend slams the door. And what do you know? He pushes it off the hinges. He quickly bolts up though and corrects it again and slams everything we've got behind it trying to fortify it, collapsing next to the door. I duck down and quickly jump up, expecting this thing to be ready for a fight. I don't see anything and slowly go towards the windows. I tell my friend don't move and he agrees that he's not going to. I then start berating him for leaving me out there, but he says I got scared and I say it's fine. I then slowly peer up out the window, half expecting this thing there. I duck down again, too scared to look. Now, I don't know how long I was ducked down for, but it was probably only about 2 minutes before I slowly look up. I don't see anything out my side, and I tell my friend that he's got to check the other window. It's closer to him, and I slowly go over to fortify the door. He then starts shaking and doesn't really move, staying in his spot, and I say, "Please, just do it." My friend starts to stand up and there's a loud knock on another cabin further away, and he bolts down. And then suddenly filled with adrenaline, stand up and look just face to face to the window and see nothing. Now this is bizarre. This thing should have still been chasing us, or maybe it was still out there, so I duck down. Every so often we get the clicking sound further away. This goes on for a good 10 minutes until I let my guard down a bit and start to stand. And then I hear a shuffling outside of the cabin wall. It kind of sounded like somebody was throwing lots of different ping pong balls or cups on the side, but it's really freaking creepy. Again, neither of us know exactly what this person or thing is doing out there, or why it's still there, or for that matter if there's more than one of them, because we were convinced it was getting further away from us, but I guess not. This thing was probably only inches away from us. How thick are the cabin walls? I don't know. I was worried that some kind of insect or termite had bit through it and that thing was going to punch through us, but all we can do in this situation is fortify our door and hold the position. My buddy starts looking around for anything to use as a weapon, but we don't really have anything. Now, I start looking myself too, and I don't actually have the rocks anymore. I've realised that I've dropped them in my retreat, and I don't know where my friends are. Now, after about another couple of seconds, the knocking stopped. Then, just as me and my friend make eye contact again, it starts on the other side, on what sounds like all corners of the cabin. This only happens for probably 4 seconds before completely stopping, and now there is pretty much complete silence, or at least for as long as our ears are adjusting. My friend then starts to tear up a bit and I say, "Hey, get a hold of yourself, it's going to be fine." And I realise that there's probably only one way that this is going to stop. I realise that I have to be brave now and just try and fight whatever this thing is or person, because we need to at least sleep or something, because we're never going to get through this. I'm convinced now that nothing's actually going to come inside the cabin, and that makes me feel better, so I tell my friend just cover me, and I quickly start moving things out of the way of the door, and I scream out profanities, getting more and more angry at the situation. I slam the door open and let out a scream with both of my fists raised, and I turn, do a sprint around the cabin, ready to fight whatever this is, but find nothing. My friend's then finally being brave and slowly comes out too, and looks around as well, and we can't find anything. In some kind of heroic action, I sprint from cabin to cabin screaming with my fists raised ready to fight whatever this is, and upon finding absolutely nothing, I then feel my bravest and start sprinting into the woods, and my friend said, "Stop, stop." I don't hear him initially and I scream louder, then the fear kicks in, and I turned and ran like Forrest Gump the opposite way again. It's kind of funny looking back on it now, but it was like somebody flipped a switch and my senses gone on again, back to the flight mode. That was probably the best part of this whole story, is how funny it probably looked to my friend, but I ended up sprinting back to him and saying, "Get inside," and we closed the door and re-barricade it. We agreed that we're going to keep watch just for the next couple of hours, and there's nothing, just silence. There's silence outside and silence between us, as we're not really sure what just happened. Now eventually, I kind of half fell asleep, and I'm woken up by daylight. I then look at my friend and he shakes his head, as do I. Both of us have no idea what happened that night, but we both described to each other what we'd seen, and it was pretty much exactly the same. I tell my friend to write down what happened, and he does, and it matches exactly what I wrote. So I knew it wasn't just one of us imagining things. We'd only brought food. We didn't forage for anything, so I knew we hadn't eaten some kind of psychedelic mushroom or something by accident, but to be honest, that would have given me much more peace. Now, the worst thing about this situation is that we still had to get back out of here, and yeah, it wasn't going to be fun. My friend actually woke up incredibly quick, especially for somebody who's always late to things, and he said that he barely slept too, but he was sure in the night he would hear something. I said, "What did you hear?" And he said, "I don't know, it just sounded like clicking again, but he's not sure whether he dreamt it." I say, "You probably dreamt it because I didn't hear anything," and I quickly go outside and inspect all of the cabins. Now, there's nothing. It's almost just like we'd never been there in the first place. Everything was normal. I inspect the side of the cabin expecting to see some kind of punch holes or something, but there wasn't anything, which is really weird. There was also that weird odour again that I couldn't get out of my nose, and I actually wasn't able to smell anything for a while after this. And my friend, who can barely smell anything as normal, could really smell it strong. We pack up hesitantly and begin to leave. Now, upon the way back, my friend actually does a good job of constantly covering our six and looking behind us. The forest felt much more peaceful than before, which is really weird, almost like the entire atmosphere had changed. It's something that I've never experienced since, even during my work as a ranger, and I still think of this. Now, we ended up getting halfway back in absolute record time, and we have to stop for a water break. Now, as I'm sitting there drinking on my water, I can see a silhouette again, not far off where we are, and I freeze for a moment. It takes a second, but I realise that this one's just a tree, but it showed you the kind of state of mind that I was in at the time. Every shadow is becoming a monster now, cast by the trees and sunlight, and I don't want to be out here with the monsters any longer. I then revealed to my friend about the weird glowing eyes that I'd seen when I was tired, and he says that's exactly what I've seen too. I then apologised for not telling him sooner and say that I didn't want to worry you, but he says it's fine. Now, even though that our scenery around us was beautiful and peaceful, we felt out of place. Almost like a soldier who's just come back from war and hasn't readjusted to anything. So we continue on with the rest of our hike. Neither of us is saying much, we're just ready to fight now. We've actually sharpened some sticks and got some rocks in one of the rucksacks, and we're ready just to put off a fight. And I've actually said that I'm just going to charge this thing, and my friend agrees. Whether he would have actually charged with me or not, I don't know, but I was just sick of this. I've never been so scared before, and I'm pretty sure the only reason half of this stopped was that I scared off this person or thing. We eventually make it to the last part of the hike, and we tent in for one last time. Now, we must have overslept, because when we wake up, the sun's up pretty high in the sky, which means we've been out for a while. I wake up and we get our stuff ready and head off again. Now we're not long off walking out of this forest and I'm more than relieved. We eventually make it back to safety and back to the car and load up everything. We quickly flick on the radio trying to listen to anything on the news channel, but there's nothing. Nothing at all. I'm almost expecting there to be countless sightings of some crazy person out there in the woods that we're in, but there's nothing. No one's phoned in. Everything's as normal, and the news for the day is that there's no news, which I think's really weird. Now my friend was really desperate to report in what had happened to us, but I was reluctant. Putting out a crazy claim like that, as it would seem, would really put my job into jeopardy, and I didn't really want to do that. Plus, I don't know, there's certain things that I don't think you can put out there because a lot of people won't believe you, and people aren't going to look at you the same. But we both agreed what we saw was crazy, and I told my friend that I wasn't really going to tell anyone, and my friend said that he was going to do the same. Now, neither of us can make sense of what happened to us that day. I still can't myself, and even now while working as a ranger still, I still get shudders every time there's a shadow tall enough cast by a tree that looks like a silhouette. Now, I really don't want to claim what I saw was supernatural or paranormal, because I don't really believe in those things, but I'm convinced that it could not have been a person. Especially from my job, I would pretty definitively know whether it was or not, but it's just impossible. So that leads me to my next question. What was that thing out there following us for so long? And what would have happened if I didn't get brave suddenly? I'm pretty certain we were safe in those cabins, but I don't know, something was just off about it. I've also forgave my friend for how cowardly he was, but it still annoys me knowing that I was advancing towards this thing and he was just hiding back there. But I'd hate to think what would have happened if we didn't have a tent up, or if we hadn't had a cabin to take shelter in. I also have no idea why those cabins were there in the first place or who previously used them. Some people have claimed that it's been used for witchcraft and things like that before. This is what my friend says, but I don't believe that, and whatever this was far more weird than anything I've ever seen in my life before. I just want to share my story just in case anyone's had anything similar and feels like they're alone in this, because I can tell you, you're not. I haven't met anybody else who's seen anything like this, and I get told, oh, it might have been a Mothman or skinwalkers, but I don't know. Maybe it was just some kind of spirit we disturbed, but I really don't know what to think of it. But yeah, if you have experienced anything like this before, just know that you're not alone in this, and just to be careful out there in the woods. You really don't know what's out there,